Right. Welcome back to the Onyx Report. Hope y'all are well. Oh man, it's been a crazy day. Hold on. Okay. Let's see. So shout out to all of y'all who are supporting the show. And I have to say the support for the show has been growing. I'll have a nice announcement for y'all Friday in respect to that increased support. So hopefully things will be going pretty smooth. We are broadcasting today from Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitch, Twitter, innerlightradio.com, as well as YouTube. So I hope everybody's well. Shout out to those who have been supporting from the beginning. We got Clutch in here. What's going on? MLR, good to see you. We got Ron. We got Spain Man, John, Queen Kalila. How you doing? Brother Rashid. Brother Damon, Joe. See a number of the brothers come through. Hey, Rue. What's good with you? Malika. Always good to see you, man. Got KJ in here. Greg. South Shaolin. Right? Brothers are in the house. So shout out to y'all for the support. Starting with Brother Heru. Appreciate that. Y'all know the deal. Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the show if you will. You can do so with all the things on the screen: Patreon, Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or you can super chat right here on YouTube. And of course, on Patreon, you can support the Onyx Report and or the Institute for Black Male Studies with a monthly donation that kind of covers both. Because this is 100% independently financed. None of this is coming from any kind of corporate backing, network, whatever. Y'all know the deal. This is all independent media. So it relies on your support. Shout out to Brandon. It's great to catch this live. My time has been monopolized as of late. Oh, babies, that's right. Break it all down, Doc. We'll definitely do, man. Congratulations. Yeah, that is a time commitment for you. Shout out to MLR. Just supporting my Black male scholars as always. Much appreciated. Thank you very much. We are doing what we're trying to do. We're trying to get it off. I'll be broadcasting, I think tomorrow with Brother Green Gorilla on his channel and on mine. So we'll get you some more information on that as it develops. Shout out to Expansion Wiring for the Cash App. Appreciate that. So it's coming together. We got a lot happening, a lot of good things in store for you. I wanted to start today with a bit of public service announcement, kind of a reminder of the quality of life that Black men have to navigate with. We're just going to take a quick moment to look at this, but it is important. All right, so let's see if I can open this up a little bit. All right. So here you got an article from Atlanta Black Star, right? It took so long. 53-year-old New Orleans man freed from prison after 36 years using the same evidence that could have cleared him at trial, right? So you got Sullivan Walter, 53 of New Orleans, Louisiana, was wrongfully convicted for a crime he did not commit at 17 years old. Now just process that for a second. 17 to 53. Those years spent in prison behind an accusation. Getting some strange feedback. I hope that's not going to be another sound problem. But anyway, and you really only hear about this with Black men. And this is an interesting thing on a number of levels because, at the same time, people like to say to me that, racism doesn't exist. Black men just make up their own problems. They're fabricating things. They're playing victim. This is not about playing victim. This is real life. This brother spent from 17 to 53 in prison on a false accusation. And the evidence that freed him was the same evidence that could have freed him then. So let's continue. Makes him the 5th longest incarceration of any juvenile in the United States. He was recently released from prison after 36 years behind bars. The 5th longest wrongful incarceration of any juvenile in the U.S., thanks to key evidence his lawyers say was in plain sight from the start. Right? He says, I'm overwhelmed with joy, but it's also a bittersweet feeling because it took so long, said Walter, who has since been exonerated. Walter has spent all of his adult life incarcerated. His release from Elaine Hunt Correctional Center just south of Baton Rouge, Louisiana on August 25th, 2022 happened because the Innocence Project, New Orleans, gave his case a much needed second look. So what happens if Black men don't have advocates, legal advocates who are willing to give it a second look, right? This is the same kind of thing that happened with Brian Banks. For those of you not familiar, you can actually purchase or rent the movie Brian Banks, watch it online, and you see the same kind of thing, right? On May 9th, 1986, a woman was raped after a man broke into her New Orleans home and threatened to harm her and her 8-year-old son with a knife if she didn't have sex with him. After the incident, the woman reported the rape to the police. Court records indicate that 4 days after the rape, the woman assisted a police artist in making a composite sketch of the man who raped her. Meanwhile, Walter, who was 17 years old at the time and already in the crosshairs of police after an arrest for burglary, became an easy target. I continued to not cooperate, and as a result of that, I was rebooked, charged with a rape charge, and even then, I didn't think it would be possible for me to be convicted of something I was accused of and had nothing to do with it. One of the officers with NOPD saw the composite drawing and said, "Hey, that looked like Sullivan Walter. Let's see if he fits the suspect rape case." And it was an inadvertent misidentification by the victim of rape, said Richard Davis, legal director of the Innocence Project, New Orleans. A month later, in June 1986, the woman picked Walter's photo in a suspect lineup and claimed he was her rapist. At the trial in December 1986, the woman stated there was no doubt Walter was the man that raped her. Court records indicate, however, a criminalist expert who testified said he tested the semen left behind by the rapist, found it was from a non-secretor, meaning the semen did not contain blood type contents, a rare condition considering 80% of men produce blood type contents within their semen, according to court documents. My blood type showed that I was the total opposite. My blood type secreted. The perpetrator of the crime had been identified as someone whose blood type was rare, and he was categorized as a non-secretor, Walter said of the key evidence. Despite this information being known, it was not presented to the jury at the trial, and Walter was sentenced to 39 years in prison, 35 years for the rape charge, and 4 years for the burglary. Just being in prison alone and convicted of a rape charge, it's a blemish. It tears you down. It destroys you, Walter said of his wrongful conviction and subsequent 3 decades in prison. Despite maintaining his innocence, Walter says he struggled to secure a good legal representation to get his case reopened and the rape kit re-examined. Until the Innocence Project New Orleans lawyers stepped in to get a local district attorney to review the case last year. What we're used to in these wrongful conviction cases, in some way, the evidence is being concealed, but in this case, it was right there in the open. Right? Davis and the Innocence Project manager managed to get a judge to re-examine Walter's case, and they go from there. So you can check this out. As I said, this is at AtlantaBlackStar.com, and go through it yourself. But at the end of the day, this is a reality, innocent or guilty, that Black men face just navigating day-to-day society. Not knowing when they walk out of their door if they might be arbitrarily arrested, not only for something they may not have done, but simply because somebody's decided they want to exact some type of punishment simply because they can. Right? So that said, be careful, brothers out there. Advocate for one another, support one another best you can. Hopefully you have family. Hopefully you have friends. Hopefully you have others that can stand on your behalf. But at the end of the day, this is the reality. And I wanted to put this out there because it speaks to what we are used to on an everyday level. When I talk to Black men about these kind of situations, they don't blink. It's not, shocking, nowhere near to the extent it should be, because it's by and large a story that most people, most Black men, most particularly, understand. And they know every time they walk out of their door that it can happen to them on any given day. And this goes back. This goes back to stereotypes that have been in play since, at the very least, the 19th century, if not earlier. Right? Popular ideas about hypersexual Black men have incriminated and actually been used to incarcerate Black men who've committed no crime, simply because they exist. I just wanted to put that out there, remind you of the context, remind you of the reality that Black men live through, and in some way to, on a certain level, celebrate Sullivan's freedom. I'm happy for him. I can't fathom how exactly you navigate back into society after spending 3 decades in prison. What that means for him, I have no idea. A shout out to this brother for getting out. I hope he's able to live a better life, even though so much of it is gone to a senseless kind of situation. Anyway, I would like to welcome a brother. He's been on the show before, but we were having a conversation on Facebook. We were kind of talking about a few things, and he introduced an idea that I thought worthy of some conversation. So what I would like to do is welcome Davi MGTOW back to the show. What's going on? Hey, man, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. How's it going, brother?
Going well, going well. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I think it's I was sharing some of this information. I was speaking to some other colleagues, and yeah, it's very interesting, man. It's a very interesting subject. The dialogue that got started on that post.
Well, tell us a little bit about a little bit as much as you can about yourself, but then a little bit about the post and how we ended up kind of getting into this.
Well, in 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 one of the environments in which I work, I mean, I do several things, uh, but one of the business I have consulting. I work with a lot of people who are social workers. I work with some people who are psychologists. I work with some people who are lawyers, and so dealing with families in general, um, and some in the courts. So when it comes to the matter of paternity, that's a very significant uh, uh, aspect of adjudication in a family courts. And so
Hmm.
when it comes to misattributed paternity, I thought that was very interesting because uh, that nullifies a lot of the legal responsibilities that men would have depending on the state. But it also it's only really been viewed through the lens of the financial ramifications, right, and the legal ramifications and responsibilities. But it's rare that it's looked at from how it has a deleterious effect on the health of men in particular.
So we're talking about false paternity, and we're looking at. I mean, we're commonly, excuse me, we commonly talk about false paternity and the effects it has, as you said. It may be in court, in a few other areas where it's commonly discussed. But what I found intriguing about what you introduced in that comment stream, very few people talk about what impact it has on men. We talk about it financially, those kind of things, but not actually beyond that, right? And so you kind of went in a direction that I hadn't really heard too many people talk about. So kind of walk us through what that looked like, what that information you found was, and really what even led to the question for you to explore how Black men deal with false paternity, beyond the typical discussion.
Well, one of the things, the post itself was interesting when the brother, because it was interesting just seeing the frequency of it. Wanted me to dig deeper into it because you had several shows before that spoke about paternity from different perspectives, where the brothers spoke about it directly in terms of court or indirectly, uh, and so the post itself, when the brother said, "Well, there's all three kids were tested and weren't his," you know, it dawned on me this isn't something that's oftentimes, and even I'm guilty of it. It's viewed as something that's uncommon, that it does happen, but uh, people who argue against it pretty much say, well, this is they trivialize it. They say, well, this doesn't really happen that often, so men's experiences
Right,
aren't as
right,
important, right? They'll also argue that, oh, well, the measurement, as a certain Dr. Draper would say, that well, men's uh, word I'm looking for. Fatherhood is not just the result of a biological test. That there's so they make the argument that fatherhood is so much more than just a biological test. But in reality, but recent data shows that there's a holistic approach. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that happen to men that change financially, that change legally, but also change biologically and mentally and psychologically when they become fathers. And so the severance of that tie to the child is akin to the death of a child, right? And there was recent research. I'm trying to. I'll find a study later. But there's recent research that actually interviewed these men, and the men themselves described it as as shocking. They described it as depressing. They described it as they were in states of grief. And this clinician discovered that this was very similar to bereavement. But what
mhm,
makes it unique experience to that of men is that with normal bereavement, it requires, just by definition, for the bereaved to have someone who died, right? But in this case, the child's still alive, and even
right.
in cases where the father wants to continue a relationship with the child, they still it's difficult to get past that initial stage of grief, and so that shows that there's much more to this than how much money someone loses, which is still significant, but it goes deeper to the very being and identity of the person, which or men in this case.
Well, and I do want to highlight too, it can be even more devastating, even just on a financial level, if you don't have many finances to begin with, right? So to be drawn into this, without resources is already problematic enough. And we're going to delve into what you found, but I want to show two posts that I think led up to this discussion. Okay, so the first of which, now these, shout out to Attorney Dennis Sperling, because Dennis is responsible for both of the posts that talked about this issue. And I want to quickly give a public service announcement. If you're going to look at the community tab of the brothers in this space and you're going to share what they're posting, give them credit. Share the name of the person who's putting this out there, because brothers are working around the clock to put out new information, have new kinds of conversations, and they're working hard, even when it comes to just identifying posts that they want to share. So go ahead and give them credit so that their channels can grow, right? But so this is one at you can find on Dennis Sperling's community tab here on YouTube, and it says tested a married couple with 3 kids. All 3 kids weren't the husbands, and this is coming from Royal DNA Agency owner. So this is one, and this is the one that initially got you, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, this
that was
was this
incredible.
was huge, right? And we've seen data, from Jamaica to Nigeria, where some of the rates of false paternity are up to around 30%. So these kind of things are happening around the world, right? This isn't new, but many of us don't think, or I should say, much of society really don't think about how this affects men beyond the obvious. And even in regard to just the financial issues, there's a dismissal of what kind of damage that can do. But here's another. This too was shared on Dennis Sperling's community tab, and it's from Six Brown Chicks. It says, "My baby daddy got promoted, so I appealed for more child support. He ordered a DNA test, and my son failed. He put the results in my mailbox. I forgave myself for cheating." Oh, that was nice of him. But he's being petty. He's being petty. He's been my son's dad for 8 years. Why ghost my child now? How to fix it? So there's so many things wrong with both of these posts,
I'm telling you.
and the complete, not only dismissal but lack of empathy, lack of humanity, the complete disconnect, as to why men would take issue with this. And I've heard this a lot, most particularly in the comment sections, and overwhelmingly from women. The idea
Hmm.
is, well, you've already been his father, so you're his father, and that's it. And it's like, well, even if I agree with you, that has nothing to do with the exploitation that this person is engaged in and the impact that it has. And it really doesn't mean that you should be able to escape accountability. There are men in the comment sections of both of these posts that argue that there should be criminal charges extended toward women who engage in false paternity, right? And,
Yeah,
and that, and not only in terms of false paternity, but even false accusations of rape. There should be criminal charges. But we find that many of the women involved in those situations, they don't even have their names publicized. We've seen celebrities falsely accused of sexual crimes, and when they've proven that they didn't do it, their accusers have been absolved of being publicly accountable altogether. So there's really no check and balance in place to hold people accountable for misusing the law, misusing public faith, because as long as it's happening to men, and particularly black men, it's acceptable, right? But when we get back to paternity, I think this has become so common that it's not there's not people don't even blink at this point. I mean, men. I can't tell you how many men have written me about raising children that they found out late weren't theirs, and the degree, and some of them were married for years. It's not like
hmm,
a one night stand, but there are those cases. I recently talked to a former student of mine who didn't know out of 3 different men which one was her baby's father. Okay, and from there she chose arbitrarily the richest one. When he required a DNA test, obviously she found out it wasn't hers. She went to the second richest one, found out that that wasn't hers, and then the third one, just by default, she just kind of let him know it was her kid. And so
wow.
I look at these kind of situations and I'm like, this happens so commonly for black men. For us, it's not a shock. Just like the story I read earlier about the brother who spent 3 decades in prison over a false, rape charge. But again, we're getting real comfortable with black men being accountable for things they haven't done And even when they're found innocent, there's no real retribution in place. There's
Yeah.
no real, reparation in place for what these brothers go through. What do you think about that?
Well, something. One of the points I thought was interesting that you mentioned earlier is even when it comes to paternity fraud. I was reading a it was in a Washington and Lee Journal of Civil Rights and Social Justice, Taxation Without Duplication by Sean Seliber. And basically, what he argued for is that there shouldn't be a requirement for proving false paternity to begin with. He's saying that as long as it's misattributed, there should be restitution because it makes the burden of proof so high
Hmm.
that it makes it difficult. How do you prove that someone, if it becomes extremely difficult to prove that the person or the woman in this case purposely deceived the man, but as long as you can prove under restitution law, as long as you can prove you were misattributed, then the man should be compensated for it. In most cases from the state, because in many of these cases the woman's done spent the money. Like
Right,
it's already
right,
gone. So what are you
right.
getting back? I believe it was a brother that was you interviewed one time who was like he won the case, but it's like you're not getting nothing.
You're not getting nothing back, right? And check out what P. West says right here. My
Hmm.
ex didn't care. She expected nothing to change, implying
That
that already happened, right?
yeah, and that's a very that's another point I wanted to speak on, which is very potent. Is that I find not only in uh, among the general population, but even in academic articles, like the Dr. Draper I mentioned before, and some others, when they're arguing about fatherhood, they're basically they're reducing fatherhood to the deeds done and not the
Yes,
whole person. And
yes,
they do it in such a way that it sounds virtuous. Why
right,
wouldn't you want to take care of this child? You've been so
yes,
involved. You
yes.
know, I think one of the points in it, so far I've had some success with this explaining it to people, but at the end of the day, motherhood is it's not compartmentalized, right? Motherhood is viewed holistically, right?
Yes,
She is a
yes.
mother because of her biological contribution and
Hmm.
also because of her parenting skills and and raising the children, right? Her care. But when we talk about fathers, we ignore his biological contribution. We ignore the other humanistic aspects of what a father contributes and what a father is,
Hmm.
right? Because a mother, when we look at that, that's her identity as well as what she does for the child. Whereas for a
Right.
father, that's it's solely defined by what he does for others. And while that is obviously important and is well documented, we're not trivializing that. What I'm saying is it's easy for them to decompartment. The biological part, don't worry about that. Don't
Hmm.
worry if that's actually a child or not. The one of the I think her name is Melanie Steph. Man, I forgot her name, but I was reading an article she was talking about, and she was saying, well, functional fatherhood should be the new standard instead of biological fatherhood. So if he's functionally a father, if the functions he conducts or performs with a child makes him a father, that should be the case. And so we're in the middle of a social battle right now where fatherhood is being defined by people who either can't or never will be fathers, right? We're talking about,
And
it's
very
so
little
it's defined by that.
consultation with actual fathers as a way. And by the way, now real quick, shout out to Officer Faulkner. He says, I appreciate that support. He says it's amazing how even when you're not the father, they will try to convince you to stay in the child's life, but not understand that humiliation and shame. Shout out to Elias. Says just wanted to show my support for the cause. Much appreciated. Right. But here's one I really wanted you to see as well. This is from Rashad.
Hmm.
He says, I know someone paying almost $600 a month for a child. A woman had 5 months after meeting him. The man
Wow.
didn't even know about the court hearings, and they said DNA pointed to him. See? Now, where do you go with these kinds of situations where even the courts are complicit and men just find themselves paying out of pocket for situations that are ridiculous? And that doesn't even include signing the birth certificate.
Oh
Right? There's a
yeah.
whole list of issues that come along with that if you've been misled. So, just another shout out to the Black Male Political Agenda, where we talk about the fact that there should be mandatory DNA testing prior to that. We also look at this question of false paternity, and we do charge that those who abuse that should actually have to pay in one way or another. But let's continue. So,
I did
um,
want to make a comment on that, if you don't mind.
yeah, go ahead.
Uh, that in that particular case, also, as part of the black male political agenda, we want to make sure that, not only is it mandatory DNA testing at birth, but I'd also posit that before any family court related proceedings, where the paternity of a father is a question, or child support, or any other financial or legal obligations are required, there should be mandatory DNA testing as well, to
Hmm.
cover any cases where there may be a discrepancy, where there may be, because we know in New York, even there was a problem with one of the state used facilities for DNA, and black men were being sent to jail because they were falsifying the test. We know states are
Hmm.
funded by by having a ninety
Yes,
percent or higher
yes.
parentage rate. So we want to make sure that these men are protected. We also want to eliminate any statute of limitations. They say if you don't prove contested paternity within 90 days, you're basically as good as being a father. That needs to be completely abolished. I mean, we
Hmm.
have people, we've got people going after Bill Cosby for things he never even really did. For decades later, going after R. Kelly for things he did decades later. I'm not saying R. Kelly's a hero, but I'm just looking at the period of time, like decades later, going after him. But we can't you can't retroactively look at paternity and say, wait, I'm not really this kid's father. Like you only got 90 days for that. That's
Hmm.
ridiculous. It's absurd, and that needs to be abolished.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's another part of this that I do want to recognize that does complicate the mandatory DNA testing. I do need to say that it does make it a more difficult part of the conversation. Bear with me.
Hmm.
I'm scrolling through to find it because I had
Hmm.
so many articles. I've been accused of posting too much, but it's hard not to, man. There's so much I want brothers to be aware of, alert about, that I can't help it sometimes. So it just is what it is. But oh, here we go. Here we go. All right. So let me go ahead and pull this up real quick. Um, I think you guys will find this interesting, but it is an important part of this that we do have to consider. Um, and I don't want to take that lightly. Here we go. All right. So I don't know if you can see that there. Oh,
Yeah, I can see it.
hold on.
Oh,
Um,
there we go. Yeah.
there we go. All right. So it says a woman is suing San Francisco police for using the DNA she provided in a sexual assault case to later charge her with a crime. Now, this isn't, I'm not bringing this up really to talk about her specific case. I'm talking about how, if you're submitting your DNA for a mandatory test, you, you might find yourself in a situation based on what may have occurred in the past, and it is something to be mindful about. It's this, and the reason I say that is there are going to be people that might not support this measure in the black male political agenda because of what can happen based on their past or so on and so forth. So we know DNA, is a well, I shouldn't say sticky, but it's a complicated tool because you may find yourself in a situation based on what you may have done in the past, right? And it's important to at least acknowledge that does happen. So that said, when we make these suggestions, that we need to think about them 360 degrees.
Yeah.
What do they mean? But when we look at it as a group, as black males, the
Hmm.
question is asked: is the possibility of one's past, versus how much paternity fraud is an issue in general? Which weighs heavier, right? Which do we lean more toward in regard to where we should put our energy? I think it's a relevant question that it might take some debate. I am on the side of challenging paternity fraud, but it's something to at least keep on the table. Um, but going more to your suggestion, so you started to when you looked at these posts that we were talking about a little earlier, you started to talk about in the comment section this whole issue of bereavement. Talk us through that a little more. Why did you come to bereavement, and what does that mean? How does that relate to this? And I should say, those of you listening, please support the show. Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Please hit the like button, but also contribute to the show so we can continue to bring you independent black male thought. But tell us a little bit about how you came to paternity and what that means.
Well, I was looking at it in
Or I should
terms
say
of
bereavement. Excuse me. Go ahead.
bereavement. I was looking at an article by well, actually, it was more of a study, a qualitative study by Emily Kwok and Deanna Kenny. Is misattributed paternity disputes the application of collaborative practices as an alternative court. But what was interesting is, as an alternative to court. What was interesting is that buried in here, they spoke to these men about their experiences, and that's what I found interesting about the case determining the strength of the social determinants of fatherhood, but
Mm,
also uh, how the biological determinant of paternity affected these men.
okay.
And so what they found was that when these men, even the fathers that wanted to take care of the children, that wanted to maintain a relationship with them, when they found out that the children were not theirs, I mean, just one clip from, I mean, I guess a small quote from it. She said words such as very devastating, ridiculous, shocked, and being in a state of mourning were used by misattributed fathers to describe their experiences. All of them, right? And these fathers, some fathers wanted nothing to do with the children. Other fathers
Yeah.
even wanted to take care of the children. So the from that from what I read there, that signaled to me that this was a form of bereavement. Which, and she actually uses the term bereavement later on in the study. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but you know the term bereavement, and even the fathers describing it as bereavement, they use that word themselves. And so
Mhm.
uh, uh, what happens is that this shows that this is more than superficial. It's more than just being betrayed. It's more than even a base biological uh, uh, desire to provide only for your own genetic offspring. This
Mhm.
eats at the core of who these men identify as and the role
Right.
that they took on. And on top of that, there was uh, another study in PubMed. It was Mode of Death and Kinship and Bereavement, focusing on who rather than why.
Okay.
And what they found was that the kinship relationship to the deceased played a prominent role in virtually all aspects of functioning, right?
Mm,
Whereas the mode of death wasn't really as important. So whether they died suddenly in an accident, a traffic accident, they died suddenly by suicide or by illness, uh, that wasn't as important as the kinship relationship. And so when we compare this data together, we find that with these, because they've taken on one of the closest roles that a man
mhm.
can have with another human being besides his wife, besides his wife or his mother and own father. One of the closest bonds that a man can have with another human being is that of as a father to a child. And so when that
Mhm.
is severed, it creates this unnatural bereavement, right?
Mhm.
Um, and the thing is that oftentimes, when we use bereavement, we don't really use the qualifiers there. But natural bereavement, for those in the audience, natural bereavement is when there's an expectation of loss, right? Your
Right.
grandma's 96. At some point something's going to happen. There's the expectation that you will lose her eventually. It doesn't make it easy, but it's different from unexpected or unnatural bereavement, right?
Right.
Where there's
Right.
unexpected loss, and it's especially something, for example, with natural bereavement, there's something that is natural order. It's something that
Mhm.
other people experience, right?
Mhm.
Whereas with unnatural bereavement, it's a loss that others don't really experience. It's unexpected, and it doesn't follow the natural order of things. And so that's what happens in this case, right? The natural order of things is I'm the father. I've taken care of this child. I was led to believe this father I was the father, and suddenly, after one piece of paper comes to me, the doctor tells me I'm not the father. I get this thing in the mail, I'm not the father. I find myself in court and I'm not the father,
Well, and
right?
then and that's problematized on at least a couple levels, right? On the base level, you have a woman that'll say, "Well, that piece of paper doesn't matter." So there's another level of dismissal that takes place because you provide a very practical support system for her and the child. So all of a sudden, your responses, your emotional well being, your perspective on all of this can be dismissed arbitrarily simply because you're useful to her. Right. So there's this kind of dismissing of how you may respond to this before you even get a chance to figure out how you feel about it. And then, of course, you have the court level response as well. But go ahead and continue on.
Well, I think that's very important to recognize is that due to the utility value that a man has, the courts will argue it's in the best interest of the child, depending on how long they'll say, "Oh, the child views you as a father." It's very interesting how everybody around the father has a vested interest in him remaining there because they value what fathers do, but they don't value the man as a human being, and so they
Mm,
don't respect, or it's there's a dearth of research on uh, on fathers who experience misattributed
right.
paternity, right? And the
Yeah.
thing is that on one hand we could say, well, if she was obviously trying to deceive him, that would be the case. But even in the case where she didn't know, right? She was having intercourse
Yeah.
with multiple people, and so he very well could have been, but she didn't know
Hmm.
for certain, right? And
Hmm.
then it's discovered. This still has a deleterious effect on the man's emotional health, because everything that goes, see, one of the things that's important to recognize about this, that everything that goes along with bereavement, uh, these are the same experiences that fathers have when they're victims of misattributed paternity. This is the same. These are the exact same. Whether the increase in alcohol use, suicidal thoughts, depression. In fact, several of the individuals in that the study you mentioned earlier with Kenny and okay, but you know what I'm talking about. Several of the individuals mentioned earlier had to go to counseling. They actually, some of them were diagnosed clinically with depression, right? And so this is a serious matter that affects the public health, and has ramifications as far as damages go. Because if we're going to sue for restitution, uh, part of that is not just the financial damages, but also the emotional and psychological damages that these men
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, there's no there's and this is why there's such emphasis, at least as far as my show is concerned. Green Gorilla, of course, BGS, Dr. Neil. One of the reasons we're out here is to help to create and develop the vocabulary to explain Black men's issues and situations. Like when you take this, what feminist terminology are you going to come up with that's going to adequately explain how a man feels finding out that a child he's been raising is not his, whether it was intentional manipulation or not, right? What feminist framework do we have for explaining how a man responds to that, right? We really don't have one. And outside of Black feminism in the Black community, there is no mainstream approach to gender that really includes heterosexual men's perspectives to the degree we need to. So we need to develop this language. That's one of the reasons I have Davi up here today, because I want us to talk about these issues that don't get talked about anywhere else, and develop the concepts, develop the terminology, so we can adequately and articulate what it is we're going through, how we respond to it, and what our decisions are, what our options are in those situations. Because here's the other part of it: if he decides, as one of the posts that I put up from Dennis Burling's page suggested, that he does not want to follow through on his role as father, what is the societal or communal response to men who don't want to parent a child that's not biologically theirs and they're just finding out about it? What's the response most of those men get? Right? A lot of it is shaming. A lot of it is being told to man up, stay there, do the work, raise the child. How you feel about it is irrelevant, right? Shout out to
Mm-hmm.
Eliab, new member, right? But these are the kind of responses that these brothers get. And so they're almost kind of dehumanized when they say that, that's not what they signed up for. They wanted to have children. Hell, they may have been in a situation where they weren't even sure, maybe even didn't want children, but changed their perspective once they saw the child, were emotionally invested, began to financially invest, put in time, hours spent, and then find out that they really never had a biological child of their own anyway, right? There's so many dimensions to this that aren't being discussed, and the only option that I notice being made available to these men is to shut up, take it, and keep playing the role you've been playing, as if your responses to this have no weight, has no
Indeed,
value. Go ahead.
indeed, and it's what's fascinating about this to me is that perspective is so common, so prevalent, that it's even discussed in medical journals for what's called paternal discrepancy, right? And
Hmm.
so misattributed paternity is when the woman willfully or unknowingly attributes or points to a man as the father, whereas paternal discrepancy describes a situation where geneticists or clinicians are performing a diagnosis, and they're sampling blood and DNA for genetic disorders, and then they discover that the father is not the child, is not the alleged father, is not the father of the child, or putative father, depending on the case. And so what's interesting is in these medical journals, I've been reading several such thus far, and the articles that they're writing saying, well, we have a practice right now. There's really no clear direction, and most clinicians right now think that it's best not to tell the father at all, because what if he leaves and stops providing for the children? And in one article that was against this practice, they said, it really does. I'm paraphrasing, but like, it really doesn't make sense that you would take on a paternalistic view and make a value judgment on what uh, your client or your patients should and shouldn't do. Right? Your job as a clinician is to inform them of what's going on. But like you said, this ideology is so pervasive. Again, the Dr. Draper that I quoted earlier is a medical ethics. That's what she does. She studies medical ethics, and and that's what she was promoting. That no, you really shouldn't. It's not the father's right to know, right? But ultimately, that's a paternalistic view. And in the articles that they were writing against such a view, they said, about 30 years ago, I guess the article was written in 2010, 2002, I think. So, but they said about 30 years ago, clinicians wouldn't tell patients when they had cancer, right? They think that might have ruined their lives if they had told them they had cancer, even though it's recognized that obviously cancer isn't good for you. And so what they discovered is that even though everyone's mutually agrees it's a difficult conversation to have, they nonetheless have developed techniques for handling it, and they have the conversation. And so there's advocacy for clinicians when they accidentally discover paternal discrepancy, to now have these conversations, as difficult as it may be. Some of these clinicians, just as a final note on that, some of these clinicians had resorted to even lying or exaggerating. Right? They would exaggerate the probability of a genetic mutation, or things like that, or exaggerate the probability of a percentage error, right? In order, because if it's below 99%, then it's considered non-identical, and so they exaggerate these things to give the belief that maybe it's not as important whenever the paternal discrepancy isn't discovered. So these things have these social views that laypersons may have, or persons who are not, it has implications across a wider range, from legal, from lawyers to clinicians, on how men live their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of that is again, on a larger scale, we don't really, as a society, know how to empathize for men, let alone black men. But we know how to immediately do so for women. Like if you talk about a woman who gave birth to a child in a hospital, and the hospital mixed up the child with another child, right, in the hospital, and this woman leaves with the wrong baby. And there have been cases of this where mothers have raised children just to find out after decades that they had the wrong child. They left with the wrong child. These kind of things happen. We know how to emote for that, right? We know how to emote for that. We know that if a hospital lost the child, or if somebody kidnapped the child, and right after she gave birth, we know how to emote for that. But this, whether it's the child that's missing, or a child that's been taken, or the wrong child that she's leaving the hospital with, we have an immediate frame of reference that that's wrong, that she's been violated in some way, shape, or form, and that we should emote on her behalf. But when we talk about how common false paternity is, it's almost like people just go blank. And it's just, and the attitude is almost kind of like, well, suck it up. It is what it is. And it's like, this is interesting. We really don't tell mothers to suck it up, and it is what it is. You know what I mean? Even this whole issue of abortion in this last few months has been huge. This question of whether or not women should be able to terminate pregnancies, and when they should be able to do it, where they should be able to go, what the legalities should be around that. But when you start to talk about men, and we start to ask questions about how much involvement, how much say men should be able to have about parentage, about paternity, all of these things, there's a silence in society, I think. You tell me, have you noticed that?
Yeah, I think when it's a silence, and when it is brought up by men, that's interesting. It's like a nod of agreement, like they see it, but we're not going to say nothing. It's almost like
it's a cognitive break, the dissonance. It's just, we just look at it and keep going.
Like inmates in the prison, they see something happen, they look the other way, like I ain't see it happen. Even though you see that dude clearly getting stabbed up, I ain't really see it happen, right?
I didn't really see, right.
And what's interesting is even when it is brought to their attention, they, as a last resort, they'll try to, virtue signal saying this is what a man should do. But normally they'll kind of acknowledge it and then move on to something else, or just say, well, but the interest of the child. But what's interesting there is that they don't say, hey, when a mother is a victim of that, they don't say, hey, it's in the best interest of the child that this child has a mother, right? That
Hmm.
you've raised
Hmm.
a child for so many years, right?
Go ahead and keep them.
Don't
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead and keep him. He's, I mean, and what's interesting as well is that that also shows that the biological uh, functions are not. I mean, when the mother was pregnant with the other child, she still received the wrong child, and she still had all the same natural biological responses. And so a father, it's been proven that fathers have biological responses to pregnancies and to the children, right? So just because he has those biological functions, that doesn't mean that the paternity doesn't matter anymore because he experienced it anyway. And so
Hmm.
if you experience the weight gain and the hormonal changes and your brain wiring changed because you became a father, it doesn't matter because see, the child was still false. Well, this child still wasn't yours and you're still raising them. But that's a bad argument. And even when you talk about the prevalence of it, I mean, some modest estimates place it at 3.7%. That's about 3,700 people per fathers per 100,000 fathers. With black men, particularly in what the one study showed in Michigan, it was 10%. So 10,000 black fathers out of every 100,000 black fathers were
Hmm.
were victims of false paternity, and that was in cases where that they had high paternity confidence. Right. I mean, I could bring the share of a screen if you want for that.
Sure. Go
Uh,
ahead. Share whatever you feel like you want to.
let's see.
And I would say
Share.
those numbers might be a little conservative. I mean, I think by and large, there are many, most particularly, women's interest groups, feminist organizations that are very opposed to, DNA testing at birth, the mandatory nature of it. They're very opposed to it because what happens if men are given the opportunity to find out about the parentage of the child and abstain once they find out the child is not theirs? Where would that leave women? And the state, in and of itself, is not necessarily invested in taking up the cost of paying and supporting women in that kind of situation. So if they can't leave it to women are left with their own devices, to their own devices. And I think that in many respects they don't want men to have that option. But go ahead and explain. Might have to see if you can enlarge that a little, if
Oh, which
possible.
screen am I on? Oh, here we go. Oh, is there?
It looks the same. There we go. It's a little bit larger. There we go. That's a little better. Yeah.
So this is a. Let's see if I get. Oh yeah, this is non-paternity rates when paternal confidence is relatively high. I got. Wait. Actual. Yeah. This from the study. How well does paternity confidence match actual paternity? Evidence from worldwide non-paternal rates by Kermit Anderson, University of Oklahoma.
Okay.
So what's interesting here is we can see here that they actually broke it down. It's a meta-analysis of multiple studies. When you look here at United States, Michigan Black, you see that's at 10.1% actual paternity. I mean, actual of the false paternity, right? And this is non-paternity rates when paternity confidence is high. So when paternity confidence is high, it's supposed to be much lower, right?
Right.
But in the case here, particularly in Michigan, and I'd argue that the average would be around that number for black men around the United States. But in Michigan, we're talking about 1 out of 10 black men when paternity confidence is high. So how much more so is the rate when black men have when the father has a reason, right? This is when they talk about paternity confidence, they're basically saying that the guy doesn't really feel a reason to check the paternity of his kids. He's pretty sure that the kids is his. But when
Right.
they're talking about, uh, for example, this one here, non-paternity rates from paternity testing laboratories, that means he had a reason to go to uh, to the laboratories. And if you look here in the United States, Illinois, you look at the United States in general, there's 55%. Almost half the cases where men went to well, this is also New York. Black is like 30%. So as you can see, uh, it's slightly higher than the New York average. So overall, about 1 out of 3, 1 out of 2 to 1 out of 3 men, in particular Black men, that go to check paternity of their children in the United States. When they go to check the paternity, they discover the kids aren't theirs. In cases where the paternity is not in question or he has high confidence, you still have a 1 out of 10 rate, right? And then the last slide here, uh, when we look at this data point here, this is non-paternity rates when the confidence is unknown. And again, and it's interesting in Michigan, 20%, right? And so this is, I believe this is a very important, just to put that in perspective of how many, right? Because
Right.
when we look at stealthing was something that's come up basically pretty recently. And one study
Mhm.
showed that it's at between a 9 and 12% rate. They also include men who have sex with men. Uh, but when they speak about women in particular, that's 9%. So 9,000 per 100,000 women have experienced, according to that study or that source, uh, uh, stealthing at some point in their lives. And yet, what we're looking at here is, at least in Michigan, and very likely similar in other parts of the United States, we're looking at almost 20,000 per 100,000 Black fathers in Michigan, right? Or with high confidence, 10,000 per 100,000. This isn't
Mm.
trivial. It's not to see
Right.
what opponents of this like to say is, well, this doesn't really happen. It's not really common. It's just
Exactly.
it's an old cuckold myth, urban legend. But this
Right.
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm agreeing with you. That is what's said. It's a myth. It's an urban legend. It's not true. It rarely occurs. You're absolutely right. That's what we hear.
But what we can see from the data here, and what's interesting is that uh, uh, Anderson here, he actually did. I mean, he tried to be neutral, but I could tell reading it. This was kind of a to prove that it's not quite as high as it was. That's what this was supposed to be. But what his data actually revealed over the course of his meta-analysis is that it is much more frequent than we care to admit. And this has ramifications for men, because I mean, if stealthing can get laws and that affects 9%, the eviction rate for Black women in the United States is 3,872 per 100,000 evictions, right? And so those are taken seriously. I'm not saying that Black women who are evicted should not get attention. I'm not saying that women who are victimized by stealthing, if it's proved in court, should not be taken seriously. What I am saying is that we can't use rates like that for events that don't have as big of an impact as we can this, because I will argue that paternity fraud has a bigger impact than eviction, right?
Mm.
Because you can get evicted from a place and find a place to rest your head,
Right.
but being bereaved from a child that you've raised for however many years, the financial, the legal, the emotional, the male relationship emotional labor in its totality that was expended under the false assumption that this child was yours, that has an impact. I mean, there are men who commit suicide over this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So this is
There are.
very serious.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And we know right now black male suicide rates are extremely high. We did a show about this a couple months ago, highest in the country, based on some of the data coming out. So when you add in this question of paternity and paternity fraud and what role it may play what role it plays in this. I think people dismiss how impactful this is and how devastating it is.
Yes, absolutely devastating. And the thing is, this the convenient chivalry is something that I believe you and Gigi was speaking about the other day, actually, when BGS popped on. It's this convenient chivalry of, well, we know this is bad, but quote unquote, be a man and rise to the occasion because
Right,
we
right,
need you to take care of this children, right? And so they kind of call to that convenient chivalry there, to as a fail safe for what men should do in these scenarios, because that's really there's no counseling for them. In fact, one of the men surveyed in the misattributed paternity study, one of them said, well, there's also an intense feeling of loneliness because there's really no one you can talk to about this. I mean, I can't go to work and tell the guys. I can't. There's
Mhm.
no real counseling for it, unless you go to a specialized person. This is a very unique experience to men because
Mhm.
it's bereavement, but the person who died is still here,
Right.
right? And one
Right.
of the hardest parts of the grieving process is getting through the reminders, but the reminder is literally still here. And if you're paying child support, every time that money leaves your account, you you know,
Yeah.
beyond the money itself, you're thinking about, this loss.
Well, and I think it's important that we have this conversation on a number of levels because I don't think that we as black men have learned, and I don't think this is the case for men in general, as a matter of fact, I don't think men have learned to have conversations about their own political interests as men, let alone black men. So, when you ask them, all right, do you have any, political concerns? Do you have a list of issues that are pertinent to men? Most of us get quiet because it's not something we're prepared to talk about. But when you think about situations like this that are so unique to men and have an impact on different types of men to different degrees, I mean, the black community, we're talking about a community that has still not been repaired from the 2008, economic situation. So when you factor these issues in, it's that much more important. And yet we still don't know how to talk about our issues in relation to being black men. And this is why it's so important for us to actually organize, mobilize behind a set of politics rooted in our interests, because it's not being discussed anywhere else.
Yeah, and that brings me to the point of what the policy implications that this would have, because I mean we already have that in the black political agenda about uh, how the family court itself needs to be revised, but some of the fundamental doctrines of the family court also need to be revised, and also the parties that are culpable, right? And
Yeah.
as Sean Spieler said in his work on a duplication without, I mean, taxation without duplication, very interesting title, but
Mhm.
taxation without duplication. He argued that for the most part the courts should be reliable because, in the case of the mother, they could make a reversal defense, right, or reversal of circumstances defense, right. So the bank accidentally gives you $500, then you take that $500, and then you get robbed, and now you don't have it anymore. Well, now
Right.
you're the victim, right? Even though the bank, you victimized the bank, now you're the victim. And so when it comes to these mothers, in many cases, we know that single motherhood and poverty are very strongly correlated. And in most cases, the money is instantly spent when it's received. And so the states are going to have to be held responsible for this. It's beyond going after the mother because, for that, first of all, they don't really get the bread for it. And really, it's the states that put a lot of these families in these situations to begin with, because they're incentivized by federal law and by the funding. But
Right.
this is where this advocacy comes into play, right? This isn't any sort of quote unquote attack on mothers, but when the politicians, for example, not picking on her, but for example, Stacey Abrams, right? When you're coming to black men telling them that you need their vote, but you're not willing to fight the states over this. See, that's where this comes into play. You know, also just the way that the family court is structured itself, the best interest of the child doctrine, and this is my opinion thus far, should be replaced with the best interest of the family, where each individual unit or member of that family needs to benefit from these arrangements that are made.
Mm.
Because what they've done as a strategy, the family courts in particular, is pit man versus child. And Sean speaks about that in his documentation as well. And so now you've created this value judgment where you've created a hierarchy of parties, right?
Right.
So they argue that, well, the financial the financial of uh, detriments that a man experiences doesn't outweigh the emotional impact of a child. But Sean argued, well, if that's the case, then if a juvenile damages a man's car and burns his building, well, putting the child in prison would cause emotional impact, right? Even though the man just suffered financial loss, it's nonsensical, and it creates this hierarchy of parties, which in and of itself is unjust. We don't need to pit man versus child. We need to bring families together and provide the services and programs they need. And black men are a part of families. They're not
Yeah.
a resource to families. They're not a vehicle for families. They are a part of the families, and they need to be considered just as such.
Yeah. Now, let me add a couple things here. So we got Dallas D, who makes a comment about reading the book Trapped by Law by Carnell Smith. We've had Carnell Smith on the show, and Carnell has talked at length about his work and about his own personal experience in terms of paternity fraud. So I would urge you to put in Onyx Report, Carnell Smith. Watch that episode, very powerful one. Also, we have a contribution from Not My Name. Appreciate that. Says this happened to me at 32, completely threw off my biological clock, and I have no kids today at 56 due to lack of trust in women. Paternity testing should be mandatory at birth. Tell me, uh, now is it Davi or Davy? I keep missing. I've been calling you Davi. Um,
Yeah, Davi is right. Yeah.
He's fine. Okay. So tell me this: what are your thoughts about how this can impact men's ability and willingness to trust women? What can that do overall in your assessment?
Oh, that absolutely devastates and destroys uh, any trust that could be. I mean, that would be with almost anybody, like that that level of deceit. But
Mhm.
especially the because the thing about this, and this is why the bereavement point is so important, is that the level of trust and investment that a man has between him and his children, and the
Mhm.
amount of trust that he has between him and his wife, is what keeps the family glued together. That's one of the things that keep, besides obligations, that's one of the things that keeps the glued together. That the love and trust he has for them. And so when this type of betrayal
Mhm.
is experienced, uh,
Mhm.
it absolutely destroys, because how can you trust this person, especially, especially in the case of paternity fraud, distinct from misattributed paternity, where she deliberately deceived you. There is absolutely no way you can trust this woman again. But it
Mhm.
also makes you look at other women suspect, which, I'm not saying that is the right thing to do, but what I am
Right.
saying is that is something that does happen, right? Just how women who are victims of sexual assault or IPV, sometimes they have difficulty trusting men, and they have to work that out in counseling. And this would be a very similar thing. It's as if the mother killed your child,
Mm.
right? How can you trust someone who killed your child, right? It the is especially when you're that's discovered in the course of a court proceeding. So not only are you bereaving the loss of your child, but you also have to deal with these court proceedings and intricacies of and frustrations that's involved with. So that could absolutely devastate a man's ability to
Right.
trust women enough to form a relationship, especially since men do have because a relationship puts a man in a vulnerable position at times, particularly emotionally, right? When you've got to reveal emotional information, that level of trust is sacred, right? And so
Mhm.
when that's violated, it's very difficult for a man to go back, and that's reflected in the experiences of men in the qualitative study, men I've spoken to, and I'm confident you have had similar experiences when speaking with men who've experienced this.
Right. Definitely. It not only it disrupts the capacity to trust, but when that's compounded with a court system, family court system that it can be fairly oblivious to his experiences, you not only feel like you can't trust the person next to you, you can't trust the society that you're in. That leaves black men with a seriously entrenched sense of a lack of belonging, right? And, an unwillingness to trust the system, an unwillingness to trust. Now that's part and parcel to the African American experience in many respects, but I think
Hmm.
in past generations, when you had some kind of semblance of family and community, men could mitigate that feeling of alienation with the support of a family and a community. You had that kind of framework in place. And although this paternity fraud isn't new, DNA is clearly highlighting, the what past generations never had the luxury of finding out in the same kind of way. I mean, if you had a child that didn't look like you wondered about that. But then again, there were people whose children didn't exactly look like them, so you can kind of go either way. But when you get a DNA report that says no, you have 0.0%, you know what I mean? That is so brazen and in your face. It's hard to deal with that. So I think when you really start to look at the way black men are not finding much support, even when they've been outwardly manipulated by this. I can see why suicide rates increase. I can see why a feeling of being disconnected is only
Yes.
enhanced. And then when you talk about it publicly, again, you get the response, suck it up. You're already the father, you were already there, your child needs you, just continue. And that leaves no space outside of maybe therapy for Black men to discuss these issues. But we've talked about in the last month therapy and how detrimental therapy can be from Black men and men in general when the very curriculum that therapists engage are entrenched in degrees of misandry. We talked about the Duluth model. If you're not familiar with that, you need to read Tommy Curry's The Man Not.
Mhm.
So, you have this deeply entrenched institutional misandry that plays out in a wide variety of fields, but, it's pretty well ensconced in psychology, pretty well ensconced in various types of therapy. And so at every turn, you find a lack of support.
What's
What,
interesting,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
what's interesting about that is that you find this lack of support, and then when men create spaces such as this to have support mechanisms to share their experiences, then you have individuals, which obviously I'm not going to name them, but you have individuals who see it fit to attack the very men in this space for having a space where they can discuss their common experiences
Yeah.
that you can't experience you can't discuss anywhere else. And what brings men of today, I think, to a unique position is that in the past, obviously, there wasn't as DNA technology was not as advanced, or in some cases, depending on how far back you go, it didn't exist. But also, men were able to an extent leave if they needed or wanted to leave that situation. There would be some social pressure. But from what we have now, we have a well-oiled, highly mechanized machine that
Mhm.
can force men to to. It's like putting you touch a hot surface. It's like, oh, and you bring your hand away, but they take and put your hand right back and keep it there. Like you're being reintroduced to the trauma on a daily or on a regular basis because of the way that the family courts are designed and slanted against men in many countries, but in particular the United States. And when it comes to Black men who can't really, oftentimes can't afford the legal counsel that could help them,
Mhm.
they're basically at the mercy of a system where, whether the woman wants to or not, she knows that she has that system that's got her backing. So even in the case of misattributed paternity, she knows if needs be, if she can't convince you to stay, she can get you to stay.
Mm, absolutely. Shout out to Rich. Appreciate that generous support. Says excellent topic. Not only does paternity fraud affect legal non-biological father, but child suffers emotional damage too. I know from experience. Damn.
Wow.
Damn. And that's a whole nother element to it, right? When we look at it from the child's vantage point, where they've been told that this is your father, right? And
Mhm.
most particularly if we're talking about boys, because we're dealing with Black male studies, we're dealing with issues here from a Black male standpoint. So looking at it not only as a father, but looking at it as a son who is told that this father is not yours, right? What does that do to a young boy? Right? What impact does that have on his sense of self identity? And who cares? Like, who actually is invested in how that boy feels about not having a clear idea about his own parentage, especially when you're talking about mothers who knowingly manipulated the father and knowingly lied to their sons, right? I mean, we saw that
Mhm.
in the post that I put up a little while ago from Dennis Sperling, where, as a matter of fact, I'm gonna put it up again because there's something interesting about this
Okay.
that I want us to pay attention to right in this moment as we talk about this. Um, Here we go. So we can see the way it's laid out here. It says my baby daddy got promoted, so I appealed for more child support. He ordered a DNA test, and my son failed. Now I wanted to kind of qualify that, and a lot of people took issue with her verbiage here. My son failed.
Mm.
That in and of itself offended a number of brothers who were like, failed, like this is his fault, like he did something wrong, right? But if we can extrapolate that a little bit and look at how a mother who is involved in this, who may have even gone so far as to lie to her child about who the father is, how do we make sense of what a son is feeling and what he can do about this kind of situation? What do you think?
Well, I think, to that point, there's actually a brief quote I wanted to share from, that speaks exactly to that, from the study Misattributed Paternity Disputes, right?
Hmm.
And in quote, it says, and this is the father named Rick. They changed the men's names to protect their identities. Another misattributed father, Rick, recalled, "For months, I was living in a different world. And every time me and my son spoke on the phone, we would both grieve. And
Mm,
again, for another 2 days, I would go
mm,
through the same. You don't
mm.
know if you're coming or going. You don't sleep. You don't look after yourself too well. You're just trying to live day to day. Your life is destroyed."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's so many nuanced areas to this. Think about a father who has found out, just like in this post here, that he's not the father biologically, and he decides, because he's always wanted his own family, right? So he decides that he wants to start again, and he gets in a new relationship. He has his own biological child. How exactly does the boy from the previous dynamic, who just found out that that wasn't his biological father, how does he feel about this new family that this father went out to create? And we often hear this kind of, well, the subtext is kind of criminalized, like this father was so inhuman that he went to start a real family, and that's kind of, he's kind of punished for that socially. But I think if we're okay with women who say, yeah, I want to be a mother, I want to have a child of my own one day, how come we can't extend that to fathers? There are plenty of young men and men in general that have always wanted to be fathers. And if they find that they've been lied to, or even if it's been some kind of an accident, still want to have their own biological offspring. Why is that criminalized? Why is that viewed as a slight on his behalf, and that he's somehow purposely hurting this child that is not biologically his? Why do you think that is?
Well, that's a very poignant point, and I think it's because we, at the end of the day, men are utilities to the system. They're numbers, and I think it's when it comes to women, we've basically defined humanity, because remember, most as stated before, most of what we have in academia, which goes to the rest of the world, is the idea of is how feminism has shaped it, and so the idea of human being and humanity is that of woman, right? But
Mhm.
the idea of these same chivalrous ideas about men remain, and chivalry
Right.
requires sacrifice. And so men who act selfishly, right, which is, be taking care of yourself, or there's nothing wrong with that, but men who act in a way that they deem as selfish is a really Marianist view, in my way, right? That the moral beacons of society are women, and so when they deem something to be incorrect, then it is incorrect. But if men question something that they think is morally unjust, well, they're just being patriarchal overlords that are, et cetera, and so forth. And so I think
Exactly.
it's a very interesting dynamic, but it has to be challenged. It has to be challenged because it's interesting too, because this is reflected in the court decisions, right? When the mother needs a service or program, or, I mean, I can't get into too much specifics, but when when mothers are when there's an errant mother, I should say,
Okay.
uh, the courts will do everything in their best interest, everything they can to help that mother, uh,
Hmm.
and to accomplish her goals. Help her to go
Hmm.
to school, help her to, to get employment, help her to get a place to stay. But when it comes to a father, anything that's in his interest, I mean, you don't really hear about courts saying, "Hey, you want to get a new career? Hey, you want a better place to stay?" I mean, you don't
Hmm.
hear about courts
Hmm.
trying to help men get anything or advance anywhere in life. And so when it comes to the personal goals, I mean, even in the I'm trying to find, I have it open, but I'll find it later. But the even when it comes to these clinicians and how they reviewing fathers, as far as the letting them know about the paternal discrepancy, even they're like, well, we don't want these. The guy might leave the family, and the family might be ruined. And when they concluded, they said, it's our job as clinicians to help them to help our patients to make the decisions that I mean, to have full agency. And in order to have full agency, they have to be able to make decisions based on accurate information. We can't
Hmm.
take on a paternalistic view of these families to try to impugn our morality. And so that's kind of what's happened not only in the courts, among clinicians, but also laypersons, right? There was one study where they looked at 200 persons that they knew were laypersons. They said they called, and
Hmm.
they surveyed them to see about this specific question: should a clinician let a father know about paternal discrepancy? Now, while people acknowledged that the clinician should let the father know, they, in the case that it would harm the mother in some way, financially or in other ways, they said she shouldn't know. And so there's still this general view that men should have rights only to the extent that it benefits women and children, and when those rights are in his best interest and don't necessarily benefit others, well then they have to be pushed to the side so that her will can take place. And so when it comes to the question of mothers having the right to pursue whatever family formation she wants, um, you know there's a Pew Research Center survey that found that fatherhood and fatherhood and masculinity rather were at a prime in America. That women and most Americans in general still wanted men to take on these traditional roles, whereas when they looked at women, they said, well, women could pretty much, they could cook if they want, they don't have to. They can go to a job if they want, they don't have to. There's still this general rule that as long as men do what they traditionally did, then everything will be all right. It allows
Mhm.
people to do what they want, and I think that really gets to the core of the issue: is that if men were given the same uh, uh, social and legal leeway to pursue what's in their best interest, uh, it might not be things might turn it might hurt some of the quote unquote freedoms that women enjoy, because it would be on their dime, I suppose.
Well, let me see. I think. Well, tell me this. How do you feel about bringing some people up to dialogue about this?
Oh, that'd be
Uh,
great.
you got time for that?
Yeah, if they have some experiences on that would be wonderful.
Okay, so I dropped a link in the stream. If you're willing to come up and talk about this, please come up and do so. This is a serious issue that men grapple with and don't get much support about, even within families. I mean, I've seen mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers and and fathers and uncles say, "Well, you should just the child is yours, suck it up, push it through." And while I can understand it, the fact that there doesn't seem to be much of a range of options when it comes to how men should respond to these situations bothers me. The extent to which people are comfortable dismissing his thoughts and his reactions to this and limiting his options to, obligation without any kind of sense of his own autonomy, his own human beingness. Those things in and of itself I find to be highly problematic. And I think men should be allowed to explore the breadth of options available to them based on the situation. But instead, what we hear is only one option: suck it up, stay, do this. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
So the link is in the stream. Come on up and discuss if you're so inclined, and we'll continue. So you did a little research on this in a number of different sub areas. Feel free to share whatever else you would like, and I'm going to bring in a couple of people. So we got Devin in here. What's going on, Devin?
How you doing, brother?
Doing
Good to
well.
see
How
you.
about yourself?
Good to
So
see
we
you.
got
Yeah.
Devin
What's up?
in here. What's going on, Devin?
How you doing, brother?
Hold on. Okay, so Tyamba, we need to get your mic together. You might need to put on some earphones. I think it's echoing from your speakers. So hit me now. You should have access to the private chat, Tyamba. When you get your mic together, let me know when you get your earphones on. Howard, appreciate that Cash App. Thank you. But jump in on this, Devin. Tell me, what brought you in today, and give us your thoughts.
Well, brother, I'm gonna be honest with you, man, and I'm coming even with the cam. That story hits very, very close to home, and like I said, even families that have established generational wealth can tend to lose it due to paternity fraud.
Mm.
And I was born in 1965. DNA paternity testing started in 68.
Mm.
So I was born into a world, I guess we could call it the wild, wild west
Yeah.
of father shopping, and
Mm.
and then you grow up, you grow up and you become really wise. You learn about selective genes. You
Mm.
come across families that may come from other cultures, and for a fact that all of the kids came from the mom and the dad because all the kids look exactly alike. And then you look across our families, and we take for granted that you'll find I mean, let's just tell the truth, man. I mean, you'll find extremely light-skinned children and extremely dark-skinned children as siblings in the same family, and it's always been that way in the hood. You know that, man. There's been a lot of families in the hood, man. One dude's my complexion and his brother is real dark. His sister's, and nobody really says anything about it. But
right.
we all
the whole neighborhood knows. Everybody knows.
The whole neighborhood knows that fat meat is greasy. Fat meat is greasy as hell. Okay. And this is the world that people in my generation, we were born into this world. And I mean, we don't have any less love for the generations that had us and raised us and whatever. But because of that foolishness and because of how rampant that crime of paternity fraud has been, believe me, it's costed a lot. It's costed a lot to the legitimate offspring of the fathers in question, as well as to the accused, right? The alleged.
Absolutely. I want to get Davi to respond to that, and then we're going to go ahead and let Tyehimba chime in. Davi, what do you think?
And that's it's an interesting part of our cultural heritage. I remember this is a point you frequently bring up, and I think it merits repeating here, is that often whenever we talk about Black history, and especially in conversation in pro-Black space, where we're talking about Black history and Black Americans, and then all of a sudden a Black feminist will bring, grandpa was always cheating on grandma. I mean, anyone who watched Kevin Samuels has heard that like 1,000 times, right?
Right.
And yet this is actual evidence, right? Just what our brother Devin spoke about, that this occurs, that this occurred in those past days, that there was infidelity on both sides, right?
Absolutely.
But grandpa cheating on, the difference is if I'm just gonna say, if grandpa was cheating on two families, he was providing for two families. Whereas grandma brought other people in to be provided for. There's a difference there.
Yeah. And grandpa would provide for them too.
Yeah, he provided for them too. He had a family across town, took care of them. They had a house. The other one here, they had a house. She's bringing kids in from somebody else. More mouths to feed. I mean, it is what it is. But let's talk about the whole picture. When it comes to misattributed paternity, this is why I definitely agree with Sean Siebler's his arguments that the requirement to prove fraud, to prove that one was defrauded, should be removed. It should only be restitution. Besides tort law, contract law, and property law, restitution law is a freestanding body of law that is only concerned with the unfair or unjust enrichment of the other party. So we could when it comes to the mother, in this case, whether she knew or not, she was unjustly enriched. But the people who are sued is the state, because it's the state's job to ensure that if they're going to mandate or legally require a man to provide for a family, that they're ensuring that he is the biological father. Because otherwise you're suing mothers who, I mean, of course, it's a political nightmare suing poor mothers, but on top of that, they don't have the bread anyway. They already spent it. That's the nature of child support. And so doing it this way, we can ensure that the states they have a real incentive to make sure, because they're going to get all that federal money is going to go right into Black men's pockets if you keep so that's
absolutely. Okay, let's bring Tyehimba in here. Let's see if the mic is working. Can you hear us, Tyehimba? Tyehimba, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Hey, yeah. I just want to say thank you for the work that you do on this channel. And this is the kind of conversation that really does need to happen. There are no real spaces, particularly in academia, for these kind of conversations to be had due to the kind of policing of men's voices and men's attitudes and men's political perspectives, particularly Black men's perspectives in the academic arena. But I just want to say that this did happen to me at 32. And it really just completely changed my world. I was I was led into a situation where I was led to believe that there was a possibility that the baby was mine, but there was really absolutely no possibility, and the mother knew that there was no possibility beforehand. And I picked up all my stuff, moved all the way across the country to be with her and the baby. Went to birthing classes. Went to uh, had to listen to her attitude that was really off the chain for months and months. The only thing that I did that was smart was this, is because I knew that there was that there was a possibility that I wasn't the father. They said I did not sign the birth certificate.
Okay.
And when I did not sign the birth certificate, she went off, and all bets were off. And that's when I knew that she knew for a fact that it was not my baby. So, but if I had signed that birth certificate, then I would have been liable as the actual father.
Yeah.
And I would have been held to all the responsibilities of the father, and I would have to go through all kinds of court systems and everything. And I'm just fortunate that didn't happen. But all that to say is that paternity tests should be mandatory at birth before the father signs the birth certificate.
Amen.
That's the absolute number one. They don't cost a lot of money. Back when they happened to me, they were like $500, or whatever. You had to go down and have an actual doctor swab your mouth and all that, and it was crazy. I was forced to pay for the whole thing. But paternity test, there was one plank. I don't know if this is a plank in your political platform, but that should be what paternity tests should be mandatory at birth. Because it would save a lot of time and a lot of heartbreak, and women would be forced to be accountable,
right,
before they start setting up these situations.
The system already got half of our DNA up in there anyway.
Yeah.
I was about to say that the interesting thing about this point in the agenda is that it really doesn't require this part of the agenda doesn't require much funding other than just the legal work to get it done, because for the most part, when a child is born, there is blood work that's already taken, right? So it really just requires to use what we already have. Like Dion said, the government just applying for a dang job, you got to give urine samples sometime. I mean, a lot of this information is already available. So just using the technology that we already have, and that's been the history of Black men in this country, that many times technology years later will vindicate Black men or exonerate Black men. We've seen that in the case of prisons, but also in the case of paternity. Now, I wanted to ask you a question, and anybody else that has the experience, I really want to know if you could describe the quality of your life and the how you were feeling after and when you discovered that this was the misattributed paternity, when you discovered that, and for the months after, like what was that experience like for you?
And kind of be brief, because I want to bring Dion and Dallas D in the conversation. But go ahead.
I'll just say that for months, years afterwards, whenever I saw a baby, I didn't know whether to throw up.
Wow.
And in terms of my relationships with other women, it just threw my biological clock way off. There's only one other thing I would say is that another argument about this is you have a right to understand what your identity is. And you have a right to understand whether or not you are a father or not, because that is a part of your identity, which she was withholding from me. Okay.
Medical history. Let's not forget about medical history.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for that, man. Dion, go ahead and weigh in, and if you're not actively in the discussion, go ahead and mute your mic for the moment. But Dion, go ahead and weigh in on this. What do you think?
What's up, Doc? I appreciate this topic. So this topic actually happened to me about 13 years ago. So I was dealing with a woman, and she said that I was the father of the child, and I figured, we had been messing around and dealing with each other, so I took responsibility. I moved from New York to Florida to be in the child's life. I switched careers, and we got married, did the whole thing, and when we ended up getting divorced, I'm doing divorce proceedings. I actually won full custody of my daughter,
Mm.
and at the time she was 5. She was 5 years old at the time, and after winning, full custody, it comes out a month after that. She let me know, well, by the way, she's not yours.
What?
And yeah, because
How she said it to you?
oh, she sent it. Oh, she didn't say it to me. She sent it to me in an email. And she
cold
and the crazy part is she had moved, and the reason why she told me was because she no longer wanted to live in Florida. She had moved to a different state and wanted to take the kid with her. And so when she lost custody, she figured telling me at that point would make me just give the kid back to her. And I mean, this paternity fraud it should be a crime. And because the devastation that happens in the wake of it it's hard to even put into words.
It can destroy families.
Oh my God.
I mean, it doesn't just destroy families, it destroys people. Like, for example, like when I was trying to have the discussion with my daughter, because her mom jumped the gun and told her, a 6-year-old, that your father isn't your father and this is your father. I don't think people truly understand like how that affects not only the child but everybody involved in the situation. And yeah, it is absolutely devastating. I don't know how anybody could do that to a person, but yeah, man, it happened to me.
Wow. I'm
That's
truly sorry to hear
devastating.
that, man. Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, because we were married and my name is on the birth certificate and we get a divorce and I have full custody, and it's crazy because I still have full custody to this day.
Mm.
When my daughter turned 9, I decided, okay, it would probably be best for you to go and stay with your mother so that you can get to know the other side of your actual family. And yeah, man, it is like earth shattering to go through, because it's like you said, it's the bereavement, it's like the daily bereavement to have this kid that I'm raising, that I can't just say forget this kid and just throw her away, because I was there in the birthing room, I was an involved father, the soccer dad, I was doing the whole 9. And
Yes.
and to look at this kid every day for 3 years living in my home,
Yes.
and having to do the daily grind, I never
Yes.
got it during the process. I never got the opportunity to truly like take it in, because you're going through it. Like, you just,
Right.
it's like she told me, and the next day I had to take her to school.
Oh my God.
And so it's just like, you don't even get the opportunity to really like face it and deal with it. It just hits you like a ton of bricks. And then you just have to move on. Because when I called my sister and told her, my sister, she rushed down to really console me, because I guess she could hear it in my voice. And so she rushed down from South Carolina to Florida, and she sat with me for like a week, because it was devastating. Like, it is absolutely devastating. And like I said, it leaves just devastation in its wake, man. It's crazy. It is absolutely crazy.
God. Let me go ahead and get Dallas D in this conversation. Dallas.
Hey, how you doing, doctor?
Doing well. How about yourself?
I am doing fine. First of all, I do want to thank all the men for sharing their stories. To hear men talk with pain in their voice is kind of hard to hear, because you're so used to men being strong all the time. But these conversations need to happen more often, and I'm so glad that you're having this conversation. Especially in today's environment, we have so many men that are talking about building generational wealth, especially in the Black community. We're talking about reparations, but nobody's talking about lineage. And wealth means to pass down. So if we're not talking about lineage, how are we having these conversations about wealth? How are we not concerned with DNA? And And I get it. A lot of people don't, it's a hard conversation to have. Nobody wants to believe that their parent has lied to them. Nobody wants to believe that this isn't my child. And I get it. And I'm the one that put in the comment about we need to read the book by Carnell Smith, Trapped by
Right.
Law.
Right.
And I thank you for sharing that he was on your platform. I'm definitely going to have to watch that. But he was actually on our platform as well. And one of the things that me and him discussed was an idea of having a national DNA test day on August 26th. And the reason why August 26th was chosen is because August 26th is National Women's Equality Day. So in this environment where women want equality, and we know that there are biases when it comes to family courts and how men are done in family courts. So what better way to level the playing field than to rid ourselves of the mama's baby, daddy's maybe mantra? So that was one of the things that we actually kicked around. So we're hoping that next year we get a national movement around the DNA 826. Every man, woman, and child needs to get a DNA test. And it's not just about fraud. And that's what a lot of people think. A lot of people think this is just about somebody deliberately lied to you. But there are so many stories out there about people who had no idea or no reason to speculate that this child wasn't theirs, whether it was the mother or the father. There's a documentary about a doctor that he was a gynecologist, and he was impregnating like the entire town.
Yeah. I did read about that. Yeah.
So it's not just about fraud. Everybody needs to go get a DNA test because we've got to understand the importance of lineage. So I appreciate the men having this conversation, and we need to have more of them.
I appreciate that. And Dion, I didn't know he was going to get off. I do hope you can still hear me, brother. We're here with you. You're always welcome to come back and chime in. But yeah, that was powerful. Davi, anything you want to add on either one? Dion's comments, Dallas's comments?
Well, on Dion's comments, I just if you, I would first of all, that is, it's almost ineffable trying to describe that type of experience. It'd be great to hear, how he was able to cope with that and what methods he used to deal with that. Because between now and when we are able to get laws to recognize this, to get some type of, because once we get laws to change, to recognize this, we can start getting some programs and services together that can help address this specific and unique experience that men have. But from what I heard of how his sister came in family, so staying close to family is very important, because the depression and the shock that this creates can be overwhelming, and it has led some men to alcohol abuse or other forms of self-medication or even hurting themselves. And so I want to thank him first and foremost for sharing that experience and giving some insight in what can be done to help cope. As far as Dallas D, yeah, I agree with that perspective. If we could, Dion, what's up? If we could get some laws changed, I mean, that's the goal of the Black Male Political Channel. It's not just a list online, but these are things that we're actually advocating for, things that we're actually going to get done, no matter how long it takes, because this has a real world impact on men. I mean, like we said, 1 in 10, men, or at least 1 in 10 Black men in America are likely to experience this. 1 in 10 Black fathers. I'm sorry.
You need to
I heard it was closer to 30%.
It depends on where the study was done, but there have been studies that are as high as 30. I wanted to quickly shout out Dardar and GC for the support. Appreciate that. But, I have a good friend of mine that went through that, and he responded to it differently. He found, I shouldn't say he went through that. He found out there was enough cause to get a test done.
Mm-hmm.
He did not have the capacity to do it. And he told me straight up, he said, I can't do it. And not only because he raised this little girl from diapers, and by the way, she's in graduate school now, right?
Wow.
But aside from that, he told me very directly, he said, look, if I find out that this is not my daughter, he said, what I'm going to do will have me locked up for the rest of my life. He said, it's all I can do to not know with any assurance. And there was nothing I could really say. There was nothing I could really say, It
was interesting in some of the medical journals. It was interesting, actually, in a lot of literature I've been reading about this particular subject, they were more concerned with what may happen to the mother if the father found out than the actual effects on the father himself. That's what took so much time to research it, because I was trying to find out men's experiences, and they're talking about what could potentially happen to the mother. And one of the articles said, look, you don't know what may or may not happen, but why is that a deterrent to telling the father? But what's interesting is, when we speak about this in terms of bereavement, you talk about someone hurting a mother's child. Anything that mother does to protect her child or in vengeance of that child is justified, right? If somebody takes her child and runs off and she goes and hits that person with a car, that's a good mother, right? That's justified. And so when we talk about this, I'm not saying that any type of violence should be justified against women, or et cetera, so forth. But what I am saying is that feeling, that rage, that anger, that man's child has been killed. It's bereavement. He has lost his child in death. So that type of feeling of anger is part of bereavement, is part of what's called complicated grief. And so it's how I'd love to know how he was able to navigate that later on, even with the lingering thoughts later on in life.
Well, it's devastating just to lose the idea. Anybody that's ever had a woman pregnant, you were excited about the pregnancy, and after a certain amount of time, the baby gets, we lose the baby. You'll go through pain just at that. You've not held this child, you've never seen this child. It's the death of an idea, it's the death of a possibility, and that alone can be devastating. But what we're talking about has a whole nother level to it. Aliyah, go ahead, and I don't know if I mispronounced your name, but go ahead and contribute to this. Give us your thoughts.
No, that was correct. My story is extensive. As a young man, I grew up under a true matriarchy. My cousins all had single females in the homes, and my mom, she got remarried to my stepfather, and I seen her emasculate him. And as the youngest child in the house, it done something to me. And so I seeked out positive male role models. And first I found them in the street, of course.
Right.
But then I was redirected, going to school, and someone directed me to football. So the first father figure I had in my life was my football coach. And I still pay homage to him to this very day. But me hearing my mom saying she wished she had only girls and emasculating men in my presence and everything, it did something to me. My mom told me, she said, if it wasn't for men, everything would be fine. So in my mind, I became what we call now a simp. I say, I'm going to do everything for my woman. Whatever she wants, she's going to get. Right. And she became promiscuous, cheated on me after our marriage, and I filed for divorce, lost everything in the divorce, and immediately got a vasectomy.
Wow.
I got it in 1993, 2010, I had a son. I don't know if you heard what I said. I had a vasectomy in 1993, 2010, I had a son. 2011, I had my second son. So at that point, I want people to understand that vasectomies is not 100%, because when I had my son in 2010, I did 2 DNA tests on him just to be sure. Absolutely. I did 2 DNA on him, and I still did it on his brother that came after him because my trust was out the window.
Yeah.
But we can't depend on vasectomies. I called the doctor that did my vasectomy. I called the hospital. They said, oh, vasectomies are not 100%.
Yeah.
So guess who's stuck with the child support bills?
So both of them were yours.
Both of them were mine. And I love them to death. And I was with their mom for, I think, 4 years. And she cheated. So I left. I walked away from it.
Right.
When I tried to get, and we was engaged at the time, when I tried to get into my son's life, what she did, she immediately stopped me from seeing them. So I was fighting in court since 2016
Yeah.
to see my kids.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, go ahead.
she never showed up in court. So they granted me visitation. They basically granted me everything. I did it pro se. Right after that, she got an attorney. We went back in court. The attorney made all kind of false allegations. So they took away everything they allowed me. So I continued fighting. The judge finally allowed me. He said, okay, well, it was still in court. We were still fighting, going back and forth. He said, while we going through the proceedings, he allowed me 1 day a week, and I'm able to go have lunch with them in school. Then COVID hit.
Mm.
So once COVID hit, of course, everything shut down. I wasn't able to see him. So once everything was lifted, I immediately started emailing her, hey, look, I want to start back seeing my kids, so on and so forth. I was always calling the school. The school was like, oh, no, we're not letting parents in to see the kids right now due to COVID protocols. So I wanted to get my one visitation a week started back. What she did was she wouldn't answer my emails. She changed her phone number, and now she put my kids on total virtual schooling.
Mm.
So I can't even see my kids, just being vindictive. But my story is, extensive. It goes even further back than that, to where the man who was supposed to be my father basically told me he's not my father.
Wow.
So my story is extensive, but I don't want to take up all y'all times. So I just want to put that out, letting these brothers know that vasectomies isn't even 100%.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Davi. Go ahead and respond.
I think there's a lot to glean from that. I think one of the common themes that we found throughout all the experiences tonight is the role that trust plays as a core principle of the family. And in Elijah's case, actually, it was interesting because at the end there, you know, which ties into the subject of today, is that your father, said that he wasn't your actual biological father, but you're the offspring of him, and you see how that has had impact on your life, and how even though you are a biological father, that the distrust can continue. And of course, there are other things that happen in your life, so distrust can be handed down intergenerationally. And it's important to recognize that, for example, that 30% number of false paternity comes from fathers with low paternal confidence. The lower numbers come from fathers who have higher levels of paternal confidence, right? And so 1 out of 3 men on average, but with black men, is 50% that go to get a paternity test because they have suspicion, find it to be true. But whether they have it comes back positive or negative, the distrust is there, right? And so that needs to be, when it comes to policy implications, really when it comes to designing programs, services, and counseling for black men, we need to keep in mind that trust is at the core of that, and to instill more trust, and that in order for black men to get that trust, that needs to be reflected in the actions and the training that black women receive, also in counseling, doing things to reassure, right, not things to undermine that trust, and their behaviors have to reflect that. Because the bottom line is, men aren't stupid. We see what women are doing, and even and even the women in our lives, and being told one thing about their behavior and experiencing another is ultimately going to undermine any type of family. And if we want to do anything in the best interest of children, it has to be in the best interest of family, and black men are integral to that.
Absolutely. I want to get Ian into this, and then after Ian, I want to open it up and let us just kind of engage whatever comes to mind in relation to this. Ian, drop a word in on this, brother.
Yeah. I guess my question would be, does this become kind of a central issue for a certain demographic in terms of economics, class, or could you say race? Because we know that the numbers in what is it? I think it's Nigeria. I think. What is it, Nigeria, or is it or is it Jamaica?
Nigeria and Jamaica. I think Nigeria had a higher. There was there was at least one study, I think, that had higher numbers than the 30% in Jamaica. But go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So essentially, I'm trying to look at, okay, what has become the motivation
Mm.
for women to have these babies by men who are not um, and have the fraud aspect, whether it's fraud or not, as the woman said, what has become the motivation for either for women to be either reckless or to intentionally commit this kind of fraud? Is it based on the position of the male in that society? And I mean, as I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about, okay, maybe the matriarchal societies are the ones, and cultures are the ones who are truly engaged in this more than the patriarchal ones. Because from what I understand, history tells me that a lot of the reasons for marriage, and she talked about lineage and different things, a lot of that was because of the fact that women, in more primitive times, they didn't have marriage, you certainly wouldn't know who the father was, right? So this push against the patriarchal aspects of society, I think, is pushing us back into a cultural norm where women are trying to normalize the fact that it's within their right, as sexual liberated woman, to spread their seed with whoever, and not to have the rights, his rights, sexual rights, be honored in that case too as well.
Well, I think what's
As
interesting. Oh, go ahead. No, sorry.
No, so I was just going to say, as the woman on the panel and watching the women that I have seen, family members, friends, I can say that from my experiences, the majority of them is it's post pregnancy selection. Oftentimes they do know, and even when they don't, because there are sometimes you may not know. If you're promiscuous, you may not know, but because they're not sharing that information, because they're not letting you know that there are other potential candidates, it's intentional.
Mm.
Agreed. And it was interesting because Sean Siebler, in his that legal journal, he reflected the same idea when it comes to restitution law, that as far as misattributed paternity is concerned, it doesn't really matter whether she knows for certain or she knows there's a possibility, because she knows there's a possibility that there's other potential fathers and that was not disclosed. That in and of itself is enough for restitution. And to your point, Ian, I think in antiquity, and this is something that's actually reflected in a lot of the journal, even in the medical journals. For I don't know why they would be concerned with inheritance in a medical journal, talking about whether they should disclose paternity or not. But they were saying that was one of the main issues, right? Like if they disclose this paternity, this paternal discrepancy to the father, that would interrupt the inheritance. That would interrupt the financial stability of the family. That would sever the ties of the family. Obviously, if the family's in family court, that's all. The ties are already severed. But in case of in antiquity, yes, inheritance was extremely important. And if women weren't married, there would be no way to determine who the father was. But remember, also in antiquity, men also had a legal right to be able to disown children. Right? Men can't disown children today. Right? You may say, well, I'm going to give up my rights as a legal father, and you can do that, but you're still obligated to pay child support and other things. So, and even to the point of inheritance. So, for the most part, men don't have the legal right to disown children, especially children that are not theirs, because the doctrine is in the best interest of the child. And so that's why, I believe it's proper to change or challenge the doctrine of what's in the best interest of the child to what's in the best interest of the family, because we know that alternative family structures. We have 70 years of data, that 60 years of data, that alternative family structures, by and large, are not as effective as the model where the father and the mother are there and the child has that stable family. In fact, there's a new field of studies called fragile family studies, where they study, particularly the Institute for Family Studies, where they look at these alternative family structures with single mothers and et cetera, and they see that the children simply don't fare as well. So we know that what's in the best interest of the child is stability. Well, if you want a stable household and you want the best outcomes for children, then you can't have a doctrine that's about the best interest of the child, because the best interest of the child is only what's in the best interest of that family. And so I think we need to advocate for that perspective, so that the mother, the child, and the father are benefited, and ultimately the children receive the maximum amount of benefits possible.
Well, let's open it up. Y'all are welcome to jump in and dialogue freely on this before we shut it down. So any other aspects of this that we want to deal with tonight? You're muted, Dallas.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Davi said. That is the main reason why I was one of the people that felt like when they overturned Roe, that was what equality looked like, because men did not have the legal ability or right to abandon parental responsibility, and women have for the last 50 years. So when they overturned it, this is the equality that women have been asking for.
Indeed. And that's why the issue of paternal fraud here, or a misattributed paternity, this is a reproductive rights issue. This falls under the rights of reproductive rights of men, because he has a right to know who he has actually reproduced. Like that's and even the title of the article itself, taxation without duplication, it hints at that, right? You're taxed. Well, Spieler argued that we basically men are taxed in the form of what they're required to do for children socially and legally. So if you're being taxed on the presumption that you are the father, at the very least, we have to have the certainty that the man is indeed the father. So but that's an interesting point you bring up there, Dallas D.
Do you think there's a certain, I guess, intention by the powers that be to keep a certain societies and cultures controlled in terms of not giving these parental rights equally to men, in terms of being able to stabilize families? And as you know, stable families and such, you're going to be looking at passing on wealth. The wealth is not going to be funneled through the government and taken advantage of by the market, because typically the culture that we live in, outside of the family structure, the traditional family structure, we have become a consumer culture. Where before, under the more family oriented mindset, we were about saving our money for future generations. So I think there is a targeted effort to be able to incentivize this non-ability for men to be able to control their paternity rights.
I think. Go ahead.
Can I just say, it's interesting with the overturning of Roe versus Wade and how it will be adjudicated from state to state, whether or not this kind of conversation about the right of a father to know whether or not he's a father will be included in the debate about the right to abortion. It seems that it would be a critical time, a critical political moment for that kind of argument to be made. If you're going to be arguing in a state about a woman's right to abortion, it seems only fair that the other part of the argument be that, along with that men be able to understand whether or not they are the actual father of the child, going back to the policy recommendation of mandatory paternity testing at the time of birth before the father signs the birth certificate.
I think that it would be a good time to have that discussion, but the problem is, because the states benefit so much from holding men accountable for things that they're not even accountable for, that's going to be the political reason why they're going to fight against it, because the states have no real incentives of actually giving fathers their rights.
Right.
In fact, they have the opposite.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing is that when it comes to the politics of the matter, we have to come from this perspective. And I know this it's a common argument even in this space, we basically, and this, no one's doing this here, but there's a common argument there that basically because there's going to be difficulty, right? Because there's no incentive to do so, there really shouldn't be any effort to try and change it because nothing's going to change. But in reality, we do have leverage, right? There are politicians left and right that are coming to Black men specifically because they want our vote, because they want something from us, right?
Mhm.
There's the families around the United States depend on men, and Black families depend on Black men. There was a Brookings Institute study that showed that when it comes to Black poverty and Black wealth, it's, as the article title said, it's all about the men, right? And so in
Raj Chetty's
reality,
work.
Mhm.
Raj Chetty's work. Yeah, but go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Raj Shetty's work, indeed. So, in the end, we do have leverage, right? We are. It's not that we're a small population that's unimportant, but rather we're critical to the function of Black America. And when it comes to American politics, we do have a very important niche. And so, whether they want to or not, if we leverage this, they will have no choice but to accommodate our demands.
Now,
If go ahead, I'm sorry.
no, finish your statement.
Oh well, that's it.
I apologize. I'm going to get Devin in here in a quick second, but I wanted to just quickly say what Davi said is so important because, really these parties that have relied on our vote, most particularly the Democratic Party, they've relied on our votes knowing and taking for granted that they're going to get it. So we either don't vote for Black men. There's more of a percentage going Republican, but it's still not it's not large. We tend to either not vote or vote Democrat. And as long as these people can take our votes for granted, they'll continue to operate the way they do. So it's time that we actually lay on the table what our requirements are for our vote. That's one of the reasons we started the Black Male Political Agenda. But I also wanted to bring up this post. I put it on the screen a little earlier from Jason Mustakim. It says, been paying for a child, and the mother says that she's not my child, but won't tell the courts that. And the kicker is that I won't get a penny back from the state. Right? Devin, go ahead and weigh in on this. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean that's downright criminal, man. And the thing is, the left, the Democrats have been taking our votes for granted because they acquired our loyalty at a time where we were a very fractured people sociologically, especially with regard to our relationships between men and women. And we're reaching an age right now of awakenment and enlightenment for heterosexual Black men, because we realize that neither the left nor the right has any voice that's in representation of us and our interests. And that can't be ignored. As much as the mainstream media is trying to squelch that right now, that really can't be ignored. So we're going to have to push for these changes legally, such as mandatory DNA, as well as legalized polygyny. I know people don't really see the connection, but it is very important. Okay. Yeah, that was just my 2 cents right there, my humble 2 cents.
Yeah. I think that if we do move forward, there's going to be a lot of pushback from Black women, particularly on this issue. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of these conversations that we're having right now, we're going to have to challenge Black women essentially, and be able to do it well with knowledge and with scholarship to show. I mean, they are going to say, just like white supremacy says, the best interest of the child, right? But usually, in the eyes of Black women, the best interest of the child is just having the mother. The father is a secondary thought to that. So there's going to be a lot of pushback from Black women, because they're going to say, how dare you challenge the narrative and the view of Black women, and actually put it out there that they are actually doing black men very wrong, and that has to be understood. So for Black men to get on board, we're going to have to continue not only this conversation on paternity fraud, but in general, continue to have real conversations about who Black women are and whether or not they are on our side, and whether or not they actually are concerned about carrying forth the legacy with Black men. And if you ask me, I would say that they don't have a concern to carry on the legacy of Black people in America. I think their legacy, as we know, has moved laterally to everyone else, to be able to promote their growth and development for future generations, all except for the future with Black men.
Can I piggyback off of that?
Go ahead.
What he said was precisely what I wanted to say, and this is why I want to thank you, Doctor, for having this platform, so us as men could come in and listen, learn, and expand our thoughts on what's going on, because a lot of men out here thought they was by themselves. And when I found your, thanks to O'Shea Du Jackson, of course, when I found you, man, it was like a breath of fresh air. I don't know if you've been recognizing my support, man, but I love it here. I'm going to drop out, but I want to say I thank all you brothers that's here on this platform. I listen. And Davi said something earlier about counseling. You're absolutely correct. And the sad thing is, men who do seek counseling, the counseling profession is saturated with women.
Absolutely.
And
Misandrous women, anti-Black misandrous women.
Right. And if you have that distrust, it's hard to sit and go through counseling with a woman. It is difficult. And but again, what I want to say is thank you, Doctor. I appreciate you so much for the platform, and I will continue to give my support. And at that point, I'm gonna continue watching the stream, but I'm gonna drop out right now. You guys have a great night.
I appreciate your support. Thank you.
I want to respond to one thing that Davin said and one thing Ian said briefly. To David's point earlier, that one way that the Black male vote was captured for so long is because it was tethered to the Black female vote.
Absolutely.
And so all they had to do really was appeal to Black women and Black men supporting the community, as it were. We'll say, well, we're going to support the community. So it's almost a chivalrous voting gesture that we're going to sacrifice our interests for the greater good or for the women. And so it over the course of generations, that devolved into a point where now we don't even know what our interests are, and we have to build it from scratch. So that's a very poignant point, but we're also at a point where, as Dr. Johnson has mentioned several times, we have a Black masculinist turn. So that tie to the Black female vote has been split, and we are at a prime opportunity to be able to take advantage of that in the coming years. And that schism is only going to grow as the interests of Black men come to the forefront. To Ian's point, also, I'd argue that what's important now is that there's a lot of data that already exists that shows the importance of a mother in a child's life. But now there's emerging studies that are coming out, and there's more data that's focusing on fathers. There is a novel interest in fathers recently, and we need to take advantage of that as well in the government, and not so much in the private sector yet, but in government, there is a vested interest in looking at fathers because they have to produce results, and what's been going on and what's been happening clearly doesn't produce the results that they're being held responsible for. So as long as we begin to hold them responsible and use that voting power among other political moves, we should be able to leverage that. And part of that is showing the data on how important fathers are. Shows like this, where we show that not only that the financial aspect of it is insignificant, the legal aspect of it is significant, but there's also the emotional aspect of it. I mean, that's all human, but I'm saying the emotional aspect of it is the bereavement that we've had, the lived experiences of brothers here that cannot be denied, that cannot be invalidated, that cannot be ignored, right? Because we are speaking on platforms that we created. And so now these things are being put in front of their face, and they must address it. And so mothers are not going to be able to hide behind the importance of mothers, because no one's challenging the importance of mothers. But we are challenging their views of fathers, because at the end of the day, the question, what is a good father, can only be answered by the people who become fathers, which are men. No one else can define for us what being a father is.
Can I make two responses? So to one thing that Ian said about the best interest of the child. So I would argue that the best interest of the child is to be with the biological parents. And so, in like, for example, my case, where you have paternity fraud that takes place, the best interest of the child isn't to stay with me, the non-biological custodial parent, when both her biological parents exist. And
Mm.
so, but in my case, there's nothing that I can do at this point other than to just relinquish all of my rights to her, um, to give her over to her parents because I have legal custody because my name is on the birth certificate and the courts recognize me as the father. And so, and in order for me to sever that tie with the birth certificate, her mother would have to agree, and she don't want to agree because
Mm.
it's not in her financial and fiduciary
Interest.
interest to do so.
Right.
And a second point to the counseling piece, when I initially was going through the situation, you know, I went to a couple of counselors, all females, and it is almost as if to say you're going in to be blamed for something that you didn't do
Right.
and told that, you know, you just have to kind of suffer your way through it. It wasn't until I talked to a former pastor of mine, and you know, he kind of counseled me through the entire, you know, situation and process, and he was the only person that kind of saw my humanity in it all. But like seeking professional counseling, I- it is a hit or miss practice and field, and it's kind of hard to find a counselor that can see your humanity
Yeah.
within the field, especially when you run into female counselors.
Uh, I, I was I just want to make a comment about the well in reference to kind of seeing a kind of black masculinist term as you were as you described, Dr. Johnson.
Hmm.
The potential for one of those lies in Stacey Abrams' campaign, in that, you know, she stated that she would win the governorship
Right.
if she had the votes of black men, and she had this really kind of tepid kind of
Hmm.
uh, conference with black men, so to
Right.
speak,
Right.
in which black men's actual concerns were really not addressed. And I'm wondering about the potential for a black masculinist term in terms of putting forth to her the question about very specific policy proposals, like I'm going to come back to, like, having mandatory paternity testing uh, uh, for presented as a kind of uh, reproductive rights issue, along with the issue of Roe versus Wade and abortion rights. You know, forcing her to actually acknowledge that knowledge of one's paternity is a reproductive right, along with uh, the right to abortion, that might be a critical way to
Well,
turn the subject.
I think it's incredibly important, but black men have to be the ones to initiate it for one. And I think part of the problem is that we haven't had a coherent agenda, to pull from. So even when you had Stacey Abrams call black men in, I think it's very much an individual. Well, first of all, she didn't give much audience. It was only somewhere between 20, 30 odd minutes that she, was there. She said a few words, but there wasn't a real opportunity for back and forth. I don't think black men as a whole have gotten on one page as far as what agenda we have. But that's why I wanted to start this conversation. And I keep saying this because I want to drive this point home. I don't care if I'm talking to the most conservative black man, the most revolutionary nationalist black man, red pill, blue pill. When I talk to brothers and I get them, honest and relaxed enough to be truthful about their life experiences, and I call that putting a beer in them. Sit down, have some real honest dialogue, get past the rhetoric and get to your life experience. 9 times out of 10, what I find is black men share many of the same interests across their political, ties, whatever their political ideologies are, when it comes to custody issues, when it comes to reproductive justice, when it comes to family court, most particularly, these issues bring Black men together across their own political issues, and that's the platform I want to see build. That's where I want it to start from. If we can start from what we have in common, because if we look for reasons to disagree, that ain't gonna take us but 10 seconds. I mean, we start talking heavy about religion, bipartisan politics, and a number of other things. Hell, if I start talking about sports too deep, I'm gonna lose 2/3 of my audience.
Right.
It doesn't take much for us to part ways, but I'm saying, can we have a conversation about what we have in common? And then you'll notice the first response is silence, because we're not used to being asked that question. And if we start to build a political base on top of what we have in common, now you're going to scare the hell out of a lot of people who have a vested interest in making sure that Black men never figure out they have more in common than not. And that in turn impacts the community, because first and foremost, Dallas D is not alone. There are going to be a lot of women willing to come forward when they actually hear Black men lay out an agenda, in a variety of ways. Now, I know, I can tell you, I've seen them. I've had them in classes. There are going to be plenty that have been trained as feminists. They've been trained as misandrists. They don't see anything, valuable about black men, useful at all. But there are going to be women. There are going to be, you can even talk about LGBT groups. They're going to be there from every demographic in the Black community and beyond. There are going to be others in other racial groups that you will find will support what Black men are doing and try and bring it out in other areas. But it has to start with our willingness to have those conversations.
Yeah.
And Doc, I think one thing on this topic of paternity fraud that is weird, but it was crazy, is the feeling of shame that you feel that it happened to you. And having to explain it to like my family and to my father and to my siblings.
Right.
It was
cognitive dissonance mixed with humiliation, mixed
that was
rage, mixed with,
in many ways, that was one of the more difficult things for me to do. Was to sit down with my parents and my siblings and actually have the conversation about, what was going on. And I don't even know why, even to this day, I felt shame about it, because it wasn't anything that I did, but it was. And I think in a lot of these type of conversations, when we're talking about, Black men and our issues, getting past that feeling of guilt and shame, like it is blow to your masculinity that these things happen, like you did something wrong. It's a big part of why
is a shameful title that can be thrust upon you even if you do nothing to earn it.
Exactly. And
what's
so
interesting is
the devastation of just sitting down with my father, looking my father in the eye and having to tell him, that this is not your granddaughter. That was among the most painful things that happened. And then in my situation, not being able to really do anything about it, I couldn't just give her up. I couldn't give her away. And like my father's response was, well, just send her to her mom. And yeah, it is like the entire thing of paternity fraud, the way it plays out in many ways, it's just devastating. It's absolutely devastating.
Gian,
those are all symptoms of bereavement, by the way. Everything that you described, that's like bereavement of a child, of a parent to a child. Those are all symptoms or common attributes that they share in common, right? Anger, denial, even guilt. Like, why did my child die before me? Or what did I do to deserve this? Even jealousy to extent, why did this happen to another? Why did this happen to me and not a other person? What did I do wrong? This is bereavement. This is damage.
Can I add, Deanna? I so feel what you were saying. I had to tell my mother that the little baby that she held, it was not a grandbaby. And I think the other thing is like a feeling of shame that I got duped. And not just that I got duped, but I brought my whole family into the situation. My mom.
And that was the thing, like, because my family is, when a kid comes into my family, it is a huge deal. We have huge baby showers. Everybody come in, aunts, everybody comes in, and so it's like a big, huge thing. And like at the time when my daughter was born, my grandfather was still alive, so it was like a sense of pride for me to take my daughter down to see her great grandfather and let her hold her and all that stuff, and then to come 6 years later and realize that this isn't This is the child. There is a level of just absolute devastation that just, like I said, it is. Even to this day, it's hard to put into words. And she's 13 in middle school, playing volleyball and doing great things. But even to this point, it is very difficult to even like talk about or deal with, because like there's nothing you can do about it. Like there's absolutely nothing you can do about it.
Can I add
And what's sad?
thing in my situation? It was the woman who committed the fraud was highly respected and very involved, highly placed in academia.
Yeah.
Oh, mine was a military woman, so
in her
it happens.
and in multiple communities across the country.
Mhm.
And it was strange because I didn't know how to even talk about it, because I knew her friends, I knew the professional community that she was involved with, and I did not want to damage. I felt like I was unworthy of damaging her reputation.
Wow.
Because first off, who are they going to believe at the time? At the time, I had no real standing with these people. They had no real reason to believe me, etc. And I felt like there was nothing I could really say. So I really just remained silent about it for the most part, and just didn't say anything. And that it was the inability to really discuss it that was also just compounded the anger and the frustration and the confusion.
Yeah, it took me a year to take it to my family and actually talk about it. Like the only person that knew the first year that it happened was my sister. She's the only person that I could actually, felt comfortable like talking to about it. And I didn't reveal it to my family until a year after the event, after everything happened. So I definitely understand that. I definitely understand that.
Alice, go ahead and weigh in on this. You were about to say something.
Well, one thing I wanted to touch on Dion's point was the sad part about it is taking her back to her mother is only going to put you on child support because you're the legal parent. So that's a sad situation in that. But I did want to touch on something that Davi was talking about, and we were talking about bringing more women into this conversation. And I think one of the issues is women are hearing the argument from a male perspective. And while that should be sufficient, because all the stories I've heard, they're horror stories that men are telling. And I don't see how any reasonable individual could not hear these stories and understand what you all are going through. But I think we need to talk about it from a child's perspective, because in the last 50 years, since women have had majority custody for the last 50 years, the data is showing that 70% of children that run into social issues become criminals are a result of fatherlessness. So as a woman who's supposed to be the nurturer, who's supposed to have this bond with the child, how can you talk about it from a child's perspective, from a data perspective at what single motherism produces, and not get the buy-in in that conversation? Because you're either gonna get one of two results. You're either gonna find out she doesn't care about the child, or you're gonna realize that she does, and she's gonna make a decision in the best interest of the child.
So you're saying that in the best interest of the child, it's better to defraud and dupe a guy into believing he's the father than raise a child with no father?
Unfortunately not, because in the best interest of the child has been used in family courts as a way to basically extort the community for what they've done right now. But as far as women having this conversation, women resonate more with a child's emotions than they do with a man's emotion. It's sad to say, but that just is what it is.
Well, I think part of what Dr. Johnson was mentioning earlier is that, and this ties in perfectly with everything we were just saying, by having, see, one of the issues that black men's issues have had before is that you had a few academicians, very few people that would speak about it, and so even though they had valid arguments and they could speak correctly on it, we have Ishmael Reed who was talking before, they largely would go ignored because there wasn't a huge base behind them, right? But when you have black men who are across black men across class, socioeconomic status, in cohorts that are coming together with these common experiences, and now they have the language that Dr. Johnson, Dr. Curry, and others have developed. See, now this creates a scenario where that people have to take these experiences seriously. See, at the end of the day, yes, women do resonate more with the experiences of children. Really, women resonate more with the experiences of other women. But at the end of the day, people in general will be forced to recognize the experiences of men, because the experiences of men do not need to be validated through children or through women. The experiences of men are sufficient on their own because men are human beings. And
Absolutely.
the thing about it is, and I keep referring to this article because a lot of these arguments that are not that you made an argument against it, but a lot of the things we're discussing, Spieler spoke about before when in restitution law. This is the whole concept of man versus child. We've reduced fatherhood to the best interest of the child. The way it's been applied in family courts reduces fatherhood to a paycheck, right? The best interest of the child is someone who can financially provide so the child can eat, right? Recent data shows and experience shows that that fatherhood is more than even fathers that don't have much financially. We can even look at the research study that showed how Black men were the most involved fathers, and we know that Black men have less wealth than almost everyone else except maybe Native Americans and recent immigrants, right? That are coming from South America. So Black men have less wealth. Their median earnings are low, right? But even in spite of all of the financial hurdles Black men face, they're still involved fathers. Their children still do better when they're in the homes, right? We know that the outcomes for children when the fathers are there are better. We know the health implications of being a biological father. They affect how the children grow, how the children develop, the mental health of their children, the mental health of the father. The families are better when the father's in the home. So
I agree.
Gotta cut straight down the middle of how right it is. Fathers are not interchangeable. They're not they're not replaceable, and fathers are more than just the best interest of the child is the father there, and his experiences matter.
Within the Black community, we should know more than anyone that if a child does not know his biological father has sickle cell trait, it could be a matter of life or death.
Yeah.
This isn't a joke. This isn't a joke. Men are not interchangeable like that.
Indeed.
A child has to know who his real father is or her real father is.
Somebody in the chat asked me, how did my daughter deal with it? I don't think she has really understood this entire situation until maybe now that she's going into her teen years. Because for the longest, she just thought she had a stepdad when she was introduced to her biological father. She just looked at him like a stepdad. And I don't think it's until now that she's actually realizing what it means that I am not her biological father.
Wow.
And that's one of the reasons why, for me, I didn't want to sever the tie, because I knew it would be devastating to her. Because at the time, like I said, when everything came out, she was 6 years old. And, I had been the only father that she had known her entire life. And so for me, one of the major reasons why I didn't sever the tie completely was because of her, because I understood kind of long term what this could potentially do to her. And so over the years, I've kind of tried to back away as much as possible to kind of slowly, remove myself from like being a constant presence so that she can kind of, delve into that situation. But she still, I don't think, truly understands this situation. She still actually doesn't really understand it.
But I think in the gynocentric environment that we lived in, I know Dr. Johnson did a show, Gynopedestalism. I think that I don't think that children are as negatively affected as we think, because they've already been psychologically prepared for not viewing the father as a viable or necessary part of their life. I mean,
I'd have to vehemently disagree with that.
I'm not making an argument. I'm just telling you, outside of the parental fraud
aspect.
I mean, I have kids myself. I mean, my kids were made to believe that the as a father, I was not a necessary aspect or part of that, a part of their development. I remember recent, a couple years back, my ex-wife tried to throw in my face saying, "Oh, when I wasn't there were men who stepped in my place." I mean, it's always this sense of, okay, as a father, you are unnecessary,
Replaceable,
yeah,
disposable.
disposable, all of those things. So yeah, I mean, we can look at it like that, but they're not looking necessarily at the Black community. That they might be comparing themselves to other communities, if they are aware or not, and understand, okay, this is the right way. But in terms of the Black community, this has become a cultural norm, and the mother for pretty much, she is the one who's determining the psychological output or understanding in a lot of these instances.
Isn't that a norm of dysfunctionality, though? I mean, isn't
Yeah.
that just a norm of dysfunction? I also want to say it is a fundamental right to know who you are, to know who you come from and who has sprung from you. And the argument for reproductive right or the right to understand one's identity is critical to this idea of reproduction. I guess I'm being a little bit redundant here, but what I'm saying is that what you're talking about is a kind of a psychopathy. It's a serious dysfunction that based on misandry, which is the exact thing that we're trying to correct in this dialogue. So,
but
But another,
I think, let me say this. I think, though, for me, right, because we were talking about getting women involved, I'm not really interested in women being involved in the conversation. Because for me, from what I've experienced, what I've seen, and I've heard from studies and the data, for me, I want to go back to a time where women don't have those rights. I mean, flat out. And I don't think a lot of men, even the ones who have experienced on this stage and in general, I don't think men have really are ready to say that, I'm fed up with women having the power at all. I think for me, I think the only alternative and the logical solution is to basically strip away a lot of the rights that women have, because what essentially you're going to look at is that there's always going to be a turn back to this default gynocentrism, right? Especially based on how it's been so baked into the mindsets and the cultural milieu and the collective conscious, the world over.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll say this. I don't know if it's even possible to strip women's power and that whole thing, especially in the Black community, because voting and policy has been so tied to that. What I'm focused on is Black men being political, being involved, and creating their own political environment, their own political language, and competing in the market for their interests. And that also means bringing in people who share an agreement on specific issues. And that's another, we got to become more politically savvy. In order to get policies passed, we don't have to agree with everybody on everything. We don't. We just have to agree on the policy we're trying to push. And you select partners on the basis of who's going to help with this given project in front of us. We have to become far more savvy. We have to become far more mature, politically speaking, and we have to be invested in an agenda that we know will improve the quality of life of Black men. And I think that pressure from shifting the political environment will shift the social environment and will shift the overall collection of environments we all pass through every day. It has to start there. And I think the change we want to see in families, in the Black community, even socially, even in regard to women, I think for Black men, it's going to have to mean shifting the environment to actually have Black women shifting in and of themselves. But having this one-on-one back and forth, I think we've all seen this in the last decade. If you've been involved in these discussions, it doesn't seem to go anywhere. So we have to actually shift the political environment, and that will change a lot of the conversation and a lot of the behavior. That's one of the things I wanted to push in this too. A lot of the behavior we've talked about in terms of family formation in the Black community is a product of policy, but it's also a product of policy over generations. So behavior has shifted from women to children to the absence of Black men from the family. These are all policy-based behavioral shifts in the formation of families in the Black community. It didn't take place overnight. It took generations. We're going to have to change the political climate, and that environment is what shifts all these other areas we're talking about.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Let me say this. And So,
But we want to. I want Ian. I want you to be brief. I want to get Dallas in, and then I want Davi to follow up.
yeah, I just wanted to say the reason the position that I'm taking is because I understand how people are trained educationally, because essentially once you start making these arguments, women and men alike, they're going to go back to the history of the world and how things were. You know, for women in the feminists, they always go back to you've been oppressing us for umpteen centuries, right, and millennia, and all these type of things. So essentially, I'm saying this cut and dry approach because I understand essentially that women are going to go back and say, you know what, I don't want to give an inch because I'm not interested in going back to an era where we had no power. And so I said, so be it. If this is the hill that you're going to die on, I'm going to push to take away everything from you.
Okay, let's Dallas and then Davi.
So one, I understand what Ian was saying, because me personally, I agree. This is about ideologies that can't move forward. So in that aspect, I totally agree with that. But I'm glad you brought up the conversation again about politics, because that brought up a point I wanted to bring on Dion. What's crazy is he's telling a story about a case of paternity fraud, but his case could also be used as an argument to rid ourselves of the tender years doctrine. Because while he's going through a case of paternity fraud, he's more concerned with the health, the well-being, the mental stability of the child than the mother was ever concerned with him. And we also have cases where we have postpartum depression, where you know that there are women who physically detach from their children, mentally and physically detach. How did we get to a place where it was in the best interest of a child to go home with a parent that was physically, emotionally removed from this individual being? So those are good arguments to get rid of a lot of things. We got to get rid of Title 4D. We got to get rid of the tender years doctrine. We got to get rid of the Bradley Amendment.
I think those are great points, and I definitely want to explore some of those at a future date. I did want to respond to the two main points that Ian brought up earlier, and I'll be very brief. The first thing about the families training that fathers aren't important. I mean, look, and Dr. Johnson has commented on this numerous times about how women in our society, particularly Black women in particular, but in general, they kind of have this expectation of what they should be able to do whatever they want in a relationship, but that the man has to, if the man isn't doing the male relationship emotional labor, this is specifically about male relationship emotional labor, like whether it's verbalized or not, the effects of its absence are felt. When it's done correctly, everything's smooth. But when it's not there, whether it's explicit or implicit, it's felt. It's the same thing. They can be trained. The children could be trained that fathers are important all they want. But when you look at the data, when you look at the lived experiences of these children, and you look at the outcomes for these families and their standard of living, it's always lower, almost exclusively always lower when the father's not there. And so, by and large, they don't care so much about what we say as much as about what we do as men, and when we're absent or when things aren't going well, they look to men. So that while it is important that fathers should be viewed properly, rest assured, when the father is not present, everyone knows the importance of having a father. But the other thing I wanted to mention is, and this is in line exactly with what Dr. Johnson was just saying. The goal is not so much about what we take away, what you can or can't take away from other people. And I'm not arguing your perspective there. You have the right to that. We can discuss that another time. But what I am saying is, even politically, it's easier to get more rights for men, right? And there really is no need to take away anything that any of the rights that women have, whether we agree with it or not. As long as men have rights, everything will be fine. If you can choose to walk away from the family, it doesn't matter if she has the right to abortion. If you can choose to have a financial abortion, right, then it's the same result, right?
Agreed.
Amen.
You can have the financial abortion. So sure, she can get pregnant. She can have the child if she wants to, or abort the child, right? But once you do the financial abortion, it's freedom of choice, right? And right now, men don't really have reproductive rights. If we're talking about that specific thing, we don't have reproductive rights. We really don't. If we're talking about misattributed paternity, Where in that is reproductive rights, which is something that Tahimba was talking about earlier, right? This is the goal, right? It not only is it's easier, more practical, but it really is the actual solution that we recognize the humanity of men. We get men, in particular, in this case, black men, the rights that they deserve, that we fought for. Right? It's been far too long in Black history that Black men have fought for something, and everybody else benefits either more or is enriched more by it than Black men, or Black men don't get anything for it at all. Well, it's about damn time that
Right.
what we fight for, we benefit from, and you know what? We earned it. They can have what we got before. They can take the civil rights that we got before. They can take the affirmative action that we fought for and everyone else benefited from. But what we're fighting for today, oh, that's for us.
Well, there's one small point I wanted to add, and then we're going to kind of close it down. It's at the 2 hour and 45 minute mark, and I still got to make dinner for my son. But I'll say this: there's something Dallas said a minute ago that struck me when she talked about postpartum. And it reminded me, Davi, of the show I did a couple months ago where we found data that suggested that men actually suffer from postpartum worse than women do. So what happens when you have a man that's actually grappled with postpartum, maybe even dealt with it, maybe even got beyond it, and then found out the child wasn't his? You know what I mean? So we talk about the psychological damage. We're talking about a whole nother level when you factor in what men are not allowed to experience as far as the public imagination is concerned, but the data shows that we do, whether it's rates of depression, whether it's postpartum, so on and so forth. There are whole other aspects of this discussion that need to be brought in. I want to give each person a very brief closing thought opportunity. We'll start with Dion and work our way up. Dion, any closing thoughts?
Well, I just like to thank you for having this topic and giving us the platform to have this discussion. I think it's a very important discussion that we need to start having more often, because I think this affects a lot more people than want to admit, publicly or openly. And I think we need to normalize Black men having, these kind of emotionally charged, emotionally vulnerable conversations with each other, in public platforms. And so I really thank you for having this conversation.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm going to take each one of you down after you finish your thoughts, but I appreciate you coming through, and hopefully you'll come back later on. Tyamba, your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I just want to say I'll echo those thanks for making this forum available. I think this is critical to the development of Black male studies, these kinds of discussions and the kind of data that you're bringing to it. In terms of this particular topic, just gonna say, once again, that key political program, or that key political point of mandatory paternity testing at the time of birth, before a birth certificate is signed, is absolutely critical, and is something that is a political point that could be made cogently and effectively while this current discussion about Roe versus Wade is going forth across the country.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. Good to have you. Thank you. Dallas, go ahead and give us your closing thoughts.
All right. Well, one, of course, I share the sentiment, and I appreciate you all having this conversation because we don't have enough of it. But I'll keep mine brief. I support financial abortions. I support Roe v. All and DNA 826. Everybody needs to go get tested. It's not just about having speculation. It's not just about having doubts. Everybody deserves the right to know who their biological parents are, if for nothing else, for medical reasons alone. So thank you for this conversation, and DNA 826.
And and your channel is called Dallas D?
No, it's Melanated and Candid Productions.
Okay. All right. Well, y'all check her out. Thank you very much for coming on up tonight.
Thank you.
All right. Brother Ian, give us your closing thoughts.
Yeah, man, I gotta bring the fire again. I think that essentially, if we're going to have these kind of serious conversations, I think Green Gorilla said it best. You're not necessarily a part and parcel of this society, of a society, whether you're talking about the ethnic, cultural one, or the overall society, unless you can assign blame, you can praise, and you can meter out punishment. So my position is, and it might not be popular, but I think as part of the discussion, Black men have to be able to have a punitive power in order to make this conversation cogent. And I think if we're going to have a real conversation, Black women are going to assume that there is going to be some kind of punishment, because they understand what it takes to be part of a society. Is that if they have done wrong and they've been doing wrong, that means that there's going to be some kind of recompense. And part of that recompense, I think it needs to be said out of the mouth of Black men. We need to take away what you had before as a recompense for how you've been behaving. So that's part of the respect level that not only is going to be written into law, but also has to be written into the cultural milieu as well, to understand we are to be reckoned with. And I'll land there.
Okay. All right. I appreciate it. You were borging a little toward the end, but we appreciate that. Shout out to Brother Ian for that. Thank you. Go ahead, Devin. Give us your thoughts, your final thoughts.
Yo, man, thank you. This was a great show and a great conversation, and it's a conversation that needs to be had and had more often. And I applaud you for your work, not only here in the social sphere, right? Because this work is necessary. We've given birth to a consciousness, right, of normal Black American thought that's not going to be squelched or ignored by the mainstream media. But I applaud you mostly, man, for what you're doing as far as the legal aspect of it, getting laws passed. This is something that we're definitely going to have to legislate, the mandatory DNA testing. We have the technology, and with AI and supercomputers, come on, let's face it, man. We're reaching an age, if we haven't reached it already, where we're going to be able to tell soon as the child is born exactly who the birth parents are, right? You know, we're going to have that power in our hands if we don't already have it. So these changes have to take place, man. And like I said, I support you 100%, and I appreciate you for bringing this to light.
And much appreciation, man. Thanks a lot, bro.
You got it, man. Have a nice night, brother.
You too.
Peace.
Right. Now, Brother Davi, part of the reason I invited Davi on tonight is not only because he raised an excellent question, did quite a bit of research he wanted to bring to y'all tonight, and he did so successfully. So I appreciate that. But we're also trying to nudge him to get his own channel started. So he's very close. But we just going to support him in that. And that's one of the other reasons I wanted him on tonight, to let him know we still waiting on you, brother. So but go ahead and give us your closing thoughts, man.
The channel is on the works. It still is under the works. Got to get a couple of things cleaned up, working on some formats and stuff, but it's on the way. So I definitely appreciate the support. And of course, you guys can always just follow me on Facebook. I post stuff every day. But yeah, I mean, the beauty of having this discussion, we were able to get a lot of brothers up here that had this experience. I mean, you do have a large audience, but we're talking about out of 22 million Black men, just a random cohort of Black men are watching the show, and you were able to get people up here who had the exact experience we're talking about. That speaks about how prevalent this is, and it also speaks to the qualification of it, right? This is a qualitative interview with these men about their experiences with this and the damage that this caused them. You could hear the pain in their voices. And what was interesting is that each of them had there was no uniform way of coping with it, just like an unnatural bereavement. There is no uniform way of experiencing grief for the death of your child. And so each of them dealt with it in different ways. And so this is very impactful. And I think, it's important to recognize that, that false paternity, or misattributed paternity or paternal discrepancy. This is not trivial. It's not something that is uncommon. This is prevalent, and among Black men, it's higher than the average. As we saw qualitatively, this does have an impact on the man's life, financially and otherwise, but especially as we spoke about today, as far as the emotional and mental health for Black men. And so if anyone says that they're serious about helping Black men and they don't take this seriously, then I have to look at them side eye. right? Especially if they claim to be a mental health counselor, or they want to design a program or service the private sector or the government, and they're interested in helping Black men, but you don't take this seriously, that it's suspect, because any other population experiencing this rate of mental health and emotional health crisis would be taken very seriously, and they're going to have to take it seriously.
Right.
The last thing I would say is just to reiterate uh, the points that we are advocating for financial abortions. We are advocating for hold on just a second. We are advocating for financial abortions, for mandatory DNA testing at birth, for mandatory DNA testing before any child support, custody, or divorce proceedings, and the results of which will determine if it even goes further. Right? Some states it just matters what you sign as a birth certificate. I vehemently oppose that. Signing a piece of paper that is not the same as signing in blood. Right? So that needs to change, especially in states where the mother can write your name on there for you. Right? I want the removal of all statutory limitations on paternity fraud and rescinding paternity. Some states only allow 30 to 60 days. That's hogwash. That needs to be completely abolished. We also need to require all medical personnel and geneticists that discover paternal discrepancies to automatically disclose that information to fathers. That needs to be a law. That needs to be a rule. And finally, when it comes to restitution, we want to make sure that the states are held responsible. So if they're incentivized to have 90% rate of paternity, fine. Let them have the 90% rate of paternity so they can get federal government funding. I'm not saying the states shouldn't be funded, but I want to make sure that 90% are 100% the biological fathers. So if the states fail to prove that is the biological father, then the father should be able to sue the state and get restitution from the state.
I see why. Y'all see why I invite the brother in, man. He's always dropping it. Much appreciation. I want you to hold on 1 second before you go. Just so I can say, Ms. Cassandra, I think I did get your email. I don't recall what it is you were asking of me, but I just did a check and I can't find it. I think the next day I was going to respond and I got washed with a couple hundred emails and I misplaced it. So you can send it again. I'll try and respond. Now on another front, now this was a requested item. I want to put that forth right now. This was a requested item, but I think it has to do with the show. So this is one of the current items available for you on the merchandise site on the Institute for Black Male Studies site. I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the chat for that if you're interested, but it's the Insert Man Here shirts, hashtag Stepdaddy Season. There's some brothers that requested that I put forth this option for Black men who are finding themselves objectified and finding that in a harsh economic market, there's that much more of an urging taking place that they play a role that they may not want to, regardless of their interests. So for those of y'all that are interested, this will be available until the 27th of this month. You can go ahead and pick it up at the link I just put in the chat. That's the merchandise section of Institute for Black Male Studies. So go ahead and check that out. It's the Insert Man Here. So we're dealing very straightforwardly with this whole issue of what I consider to be objectification, right? Financial objectification, familial objectification in terms of the roles Black men are expected to play, even when it's against their interest, right? So that said, I wanted to thank you again, brother, for coming through and doing tonight's show. I know you got a crazy schedule. I think you got to do some work tonight at midnight. So you got a lot going on, and you're on East Coast time. So it's much appreciated, man. Thank you for coming through tonight, man.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity, my brother. And thanks for all your work.
All right. Likewise. All right. Thanks a lot. So to all of y'all who support the Onyx Report, it's much appreciated. I will see y'all soon. If you have any comments, any suggestions, any other thoughts related to this, please make sure you put them in the comment section so we can continue to build on what's been provided here. If you have any political ideas that will related to this or otherwise that will improve the quality of life for Black men and boys, please feel free to participate in the discussion on the 14-point Black Male Political Agenda. I put the link in the chat earlier in the discussion, but you can just put that in Google, find the 14-point Black Male Political Agenda. And at the comment section at the bottom of it, you can add in points that you want considered in the agenda. The 14-point agenda is not, it's not completed. It's not complete. I don't think it ever will be. It is an open living document that is available to be amended, added to, so on and so forth as we go. So we've initiated a conversation with Black men, and it's going to continue. It is not a finished document. So please feel free to make contributions to add to that. And that goes for anybody who's interested in improving the quality of life for Black boys and men. All right. So other than that, appreciate y'all supporting tonight. Y'all have a good one. See y'all soon. I am here to tell you, brothers, we are not criminals by birth, perennial rapists, incapable intellects, man-children, sperm donors, child support wellsprings, success objects, walking phalluses, ATM machines, lottery tickets, unintelligent henchmen, valueless assassins, pro bono mercenaries, unpaid bodyguards, interchangeable stepfathers, child discipline proxies, unpaid repairmen, workhorses, emotional tampons, or any other socially accepted dehumanizing stereotype. We are thinkers, inventors, innovators, leaders, fathers, and men. Embrace your humanity, know your worth, and extend your time, attention, and resources only to those who genuinely respect you. And remember, your worth is not defined by meeting other people's narcissistic and selfish and unrealistic needs. You define your worth. Peace.